The crystal chandelier above shimmered with an elegance too deliberate to be accidental. Suspended over the center of the argent lounge, it caught every whisper of light from the gold-accented sconces round the room. Each crystal strand trembled not from a breeze, but from anticipation. It was not the weather outside that stirred the air. It was Julian Blackthorne. The double mahogany doors of the restaurant eased open, and the temperature seemed to shift. No one announced his arrival. No one had to. The ripple in the room spoke for itself. Servers glanced up and scattered. A hostess at the podium fumbled her pen, thus by carrying a tray of water glasses ducked into the kitchen as if pursued. Julian walked into the dining room as if he owned every molecule of space within it. He moved with the deliberate confidence of a man who had never been denied, never been late, never been questioned. His suit midnight black, hand-stitched, and impossibly smooth-hugged his lean frame with quiet threat. His shoes gleamed under the restaurant's warm lights. His pale, silver-blue eyes did not flinch, did not roam. They focused forward. No one dared to greet him, except for one. Standing behind the service station, hands trembling at her waist, was Aria Bennett. She was in her second-hand work flats, wearing the stiff black apron that still felt foreign against her skin. Her hair, a soft chestnut brown, was pulled back tightly, though a few rebellious strands framed her cheeks. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Today was her first day at the Argent Lounge. Just last week, she had been wiping tables at a 24-hour diner in the Bronx, where tips came in crumpled dollar bills and the uniform smelled faintly of syrup. This Placidus cathedral of money and power was another world entirely. Here, an entree cost more than a week's groceries. Here, the water was imported, and the soap had its own sommelier, and now she was being asked to serve the man who made Titans nervous. Table 14, murmured Margot, the floor manager, appearing at Aria's side like a ghost with perfect posture. Mr. Blackthorne. Aria turned to her, eyes wide. Excuse me? Margot nodded toward the far corner of the room, where Julian had just seated himself at a booth made from hand-stitched leather. He requested a new server tonight. You are the only one he has not terrified into quitting. I thought I was just shadowing tonight, Aria whispered. Margot's mouth twitched with something that might have been sympathy. Normally, yes, but this is not a normal evening. Aria turned her eyes back toward the man in the booth. His posture was elegant, yet entirely at ease. One arm rested along the back of the seat, while his other hand glided across his phone screen with silent authority. He looks like he eats people for breakfast, Aria murmured. Margot tilted her head. He eats power, and occasionally servers, if they displease him. Aria took a shaky breath. She could feel the sweat on her palms. The cotton of her apron pressed against her stomach like a weight, but somewhere inside her breathed beneath the fear and the self-doubt was something stubborn, something proud. She needed this job, not for status or experience. She needed it because her grandmother's medication cost nearly $900 a month, and insurance covered less than a third. Rent in their 2-bedroom apartment in Queens had gone up again, and Aria had already pawned her laptop last week to pay for groceries. Failure was not an option. I will do it, she said quietly. Margot gave a single nod. Approach with respect. Speak clearly, and whatever you do not interrupt him. Aria's legs felt hollow as she walked across the marble floor. Her steps echoed lightly, swallowed by the hush that had fallen over the restaurant. She felt the weight of invisible eyes on her, their servers watching from the shadows, patrons whispering about the girl sent to serve the lion. She reached the table. Julian did not look up. His eyes were locked onto his phone, expression unreadable. His fingers moved with the calm assurance of a man directing armies. He wore no wedding ring. His cufflinks gleamed like miniature moons. Aria cleared her throat, just softly enough to avoid seeming rude. Good evening, Mr. Blackthorne, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her spine. My name is Aria. I will be your server tonight. May I begin by offering you a drink? He spoke without lifting his gaze. Water, room temperature, no ice, no lemon, in a wine glass, not a water glass. The words were precise, sterile, mechanical, as though she were a machine and he was uploading instructions. Arya hesitated for a fraction of a second, caught off guard by the robotic tone. Then she smiled, a flicker of defiance beneath the surface. Understood, she said. Room temperature water, wine glass, no lemon, no ice. I assume you would like to place your food order now as well. Julian responded immediately. The lobster risotto, no mushrooms, extra saffron. Inform the chef that if it is overcooked, even slightly, I will send it back. It was the kind of demand that would rattle most servers. But Arya had spent 5 years juggling impatient customers, half-broken ovens, and a manager who chain-smoked through dinner service. She tilted her head slightly. Lobster risotto, she repeated. No mushrooms, extra saffron, surgical level precision in temperature. I will notify the kitchen that the stakes are appropriately high. That was when Julian finally looked at her. His eyes rose slowly from the phone and locked onto her face. Arya had expected coldness, arrogance, indifference, but what she saw was something else, a something sharper. Curiosity. You are new, he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Yes, she replied. Fresh off the conveyor belt, Julian tilted his head, observing her like an analyst reviewing a puzzle he could not yet solve. Is that a problem for you? Arya asked, unable to stop herself. His eyebrow rose slightly. Most people, he said slowly, are more cautious when they speak to me. Arya smiled. Most people probably think you are more important than you actually are. For a moment, there was silence, heavy stretching. Then something unexpected happened. Julian laughed. It was not sarcastic. It was not cruel. It was genuine, deep, rich, as if it had climbed up from a place inside him long buried under numbers and deadlines. I cannot remember the last time someone spoke to me like that, he said. I am trying to make an impression, Arya replied. He leaned back, folding his arms. His phone was forgotten. You are succeeding, he said, in a very unconventional way. For several heartbeats, there was an unexpected calm between them. The tension, so thick moments before, seemed to unravel thread by thread. Arya stood with her shoulders square, her fingers still coiled tightly round her order pad, but her breathing had begun to steady. She had survived the opening exchange. Julian Blackthorne, a man known for reducing board executives to tears with a single raised eyebrow, had just laughed, and not the kind of cold, dismissive laugh used to mock. This was genuine. It felt strange, almost vulnerable, as though it had startled even him. Where did they find you? Julian asked, his voice quieter now, but still sharp round the edges. Arya tilted her head slightly. The Bronx, mostly. A few diners. One fusion place that thought avocado foam belonged on everything. Julian's mouth twitched. They hired you with no fine dining experience? He asked. I suppose they were desperate, she replied. Or maybe just hopeful. He regarded her in silence for a few seconds longer, then gave a slight nod as though accepting her presence at the table, not as a fluke, but as a curiosity worth entertaining. Arya took the opportunity to shift gears. I will return shortly with your water, Mr. Blackthorne. Before she could turn, his voice stopped her. You are not afraid of me. It was not a question. It was a statement. Like most things, he said. Arya paused. She looked at him directly, then answered with a truth she had not expected to share. I have been through things far scarier than a man with an expensive watch and a temper. That made something flicker in his gaze. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. She left him then, making her way quickly, carefully back to the service station. Her pulse was still racing, but her steps were lighter. She had not been fired. She had not failed. She had held her ground. Margot met her behind the espresso machine, eyes wide with disbelief. What did you say to him? The manager hissed. The truth, Arya replied calmly, reaching for a wine glass and filling it halfway with room temperature water. She polished the stem with a cloth until it shone. Margot looked like she might faint. You made him laugh. He never laughs. Maybe he needed to, Arya said. When she returned to the table, Julian was no longer looking at his phone. Instead, he was studying the restaurant des Golden Sconces, the soft jazz playing from the overhead speakers, the quiet hum of whispered conversations. His posture had relaxed slightly, though there was still a tension in his jaw, a habit perhaps, of being perpetually on guard. She placed the wine glass in front of him with practiced grace. Room temperature, no ice, no lemon, crystal polished, she said. He looked down at the glass, then back at her. Impressive memory. Arya shrugged. It helps to be precise. I imagine you prefer things that way. Julian lifted the glass, took a small sip, and then set it down with the faintest nod. I do. They fell into a brief silence, not awkward, but thoughtful. Arya's instinct was to let the moment end before she overstayed her welcome, but something made her linger. May I ask something? She said quietly. Julian raised an eyebrow. That depends on the question. Why do people treat you like you are dangerous? He did not answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, considering her. Because I am. Arya's brow furrowed. That sounds like something someone wants others to believe. But I think people fear what they do not understand, or what reminds them of their own weaknesses. Julian's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. You are remarkably direct, he said. Arya smiled, just faintly, only because I know how much people appreciate honesty when they are surrounded by sycophants. Julian's mouth curved slightly again, barely a smile, but more than a line. I assume you need this job, he said then, his tone returning to its crisp cadence. I do, Arya answered without hesitation. Very much. He waited. My grandmother is sick, she explained. Her medication costs more than my paycheck most weeks. We live in Queens. Rent is due again on Monday, and this place, she glanced around the opulent dining room, is the only job I could find that pays enough to keep us afloat. Julian looked at her with a new kind of intensity, not the detached scrutiny of a man weighing someone's utility, but the subtle recalibration of someone seeing another person through a different lens. What kind of medication? He asked. Heart-related, a rare combination. We get no help from insurance. I see. Arya immediately regretted saying anything. She had not meant to overshare. Something about Julian's presence, his control, his quiet question chat made it feel oddly safe to be vulnerable. But now, she feared she had crossed a line. I did not mean to burden you, she added quickly. You are here for dinner, not my personal problems. But Julian shook his head. You did not burden me. You answered a question. That is all. Just then, the kitchen signaled the risotto order was ready. Arya retrieved the plate carefully. The scent of saffron and buttered lobster rose in gentle plumes. She inspected the dish twice before bringing it to him, mentally begging the chef to have followed the instructions to the letter. She placed the plate in front of Julian and stepped back. He took a bite slowly, methodically, chewing with the kind of focus most people reserve for negotiations or chess tournaments. Excellent, he pronounced after a moment. You may tell the chef he has temporarily earned his salary. I will let him know, though you should be prepared he may faint from the relief. Julian looked up sharply at that, and Arya could swear his eyes almost smiled. You are not what I expected. I get that a lot. He gestured lightly to the seat across from him. Sit. For a moment, every protocol Arya had memorized screamed at her to decline. Staff were not permitted to sit with guests, especially guests like this, especially on their first day. But something in his voice was not commending it was human. I should not, she said cautiously. Margot might think I am slacking off. Margot works for me, Julian said simply. Arya blinked. You own this place? I own 40%, he corrected, along with a few dozen other investments. He did not say it to brag. It was merely fact. Sit, Arya, she sat. Arya sat cautiously on the edge of the leather booth, her posture straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. The soft lighting above cast warm gold in tones across the table, illuminating the etched crystal glassware and the flawless risotto that now seemed secondary to the conversation unfolding. Julian regarded her with an unreadable expression, one that seemed to shift subtly each time she spoke. His steel gray eyes scanned her face, not with the leering gaze she had come to expect from powerful men, but with curiosity. Genuine, unsettling curiosity. "You asked me earlier," he said, after a pause, "why people treat me like I am dangerous." Arya nodded, her gaze steady. "I do not usually explain myself," Julian continued, "but for some reason, I feel inclined to give you an answer." "I will take that as a compliment," she replied softly. He exhaled slowly, fingers resting against the side of his glass. "In business, perception is leverage. The illusion of ruthlessness keeps competitors wary and subordinates obedient. If you appear cold and untouchable, people stop looking for your weaknesses." Arya studied him. "But that does not the same as actually being dangerous." Julian tilted his head slightly. "Is it not? If people fear me, does it matter whether I deserve it?" There was no bitterness in his tone, only quiet resignation. "Maybe it does matter," Arya said, "especially if the fear costs you something." Julian gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Like what?" "Connection," she answered simply. "Trust, warmth, all the things that make a person feel known." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "How old are you?" 26. "You speak like someone much older." "My grandmother raised me," Arya replied. "She has lived a life that taught her to see through people." "I just listened." Julian leaned back. For the first time since she had met him, he looked not powerful but tired. "You asked a moment ago what fear has cost me. The truth is, I am not sure I remember what it feels like to be truly seen by someone." Arya's voice was quiet. "Maybe that is what you miss most. Not money, not accolades, just being known." A muscle tightened in Julian's jaw. He stared into his glass that held the answers he had long stopped searching for. "You are very perceptive," he murmured. "I just pay attention." He looked up, and for a moment, the mask fell away entirely. He was no longer the feared billionaire, no longer the man with a reputation carved from marble. He was simply Julian, a man alone at a table, unexpectedly drawn to the waitress who had not treated him like a god or a monster but like a man. "Tell me," he said quietly, "how long have you been working in restaurants?" "About 5 years," Arya replied, "though never anywhere like this. Mostly small place diners, family-owned cafes, places where running out of pie was the biggest crisis of the night." Julian chuckled under his breath. Arya continued, "This job, it means everything to me. I know it sounds dramatic, but if I lose this, we do not make rent next month. And I cannot imagine what would happen to my grandmother if she does not have her medication." He studied her for a long moment. "What is her name?" "Evelyn, but I call her Evie. She is strong, stubborn. She used to be a seamstress mid-wedding dresses back in the day. Now she knits and watches cooking shows while pretending not to worry about me. She sounds extraordinary. She is. I owe her everything." Julian's gaze dropped for a second. "I never knew my grandparents. My parents worked 3 jobs each when I was a boy. They cleaned office buildings at night. We barely had enough to eat some months. I remember going to school in shoes with holes in the soles." Arya felt her chest tighten. It was hard to imagine the man before her flawlessly dressed, exuding wealth and power, ever knowing hunger or shame. "What changed?" she asked softly. "I promised myself I would never feel powerless again," he said. "I studied relentlessly. I built a company from my dorm room. I did not sleep. I did not slow down. I pushed and pushed until the world finally stopped pushing back." Arya was silent, but somewhere along the way, Julian added, "I lost something. Maybe someone." She reached for her water glass, fingers trembling slightly. "It sounds like you built walls so strong that nothing could get in or out." Julian met her eyes again. "Perhaps," he said. A new server approached then, discreetly clearing empty plates. Arya stood, knowing she should return to her duties. "I should go," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Your shift is over, is it not?" She glanced at her watch. "Yes, 20 minutes ago, actually." "Then stay. Just a few more minutes." Arya hesitated. Her heart beat faster. She nodded, and she stayed. They sat in silence for a while. But it was not the kind of silence that demanded to be broken. It was the rare kind that allowed people to breathe, to exist without performance. Outside, through the tall windows, the city hummed with distant sirens, headlights, and the energy that never slept. Inside the soft cocoon of the restaurant, Julian and Arya shared something neither of them could quite name. "Tell me something," he said at last, breaking the stillness. "What would you have done," he continued, "if you had not needed to work tonight? If your life had been different?" Arya smiled faintly, looking down at the napkin she was unconsciously folding in her hands. "I always wanted to open a little cafe. Nothing fancy, just a place where people could come in, feel seen, and leave a little warmer than when they arrived." Julian seemed to consider that. "A cafe, yes," she said, "with bookshelves, old wood tables, maybe a cat curled up in the window. My grandmother would sit near the counter, pretending not to eavesdrop on every conversation." He almost smiled. "It sounds like the antithesis of this place." "It is," Arya replied, "but it would be mine, and it would be real." Julian looked down at his glass, swirling what remained of his water. "I live in penthouses with private elevators. I own properties across 3 continents. And yet the last time I sat across from someone and talked like this really till Kitty think I was 19. Arya was quiet, letting his words settle. "You lose pieces of yourself," Julian continued. "Not all at once, just little pieces. A conversation you do not have because you are too busy. A friendship you do not nurture because business comes first. A family gathering you miss, thinking there will be another." He looked up, "And one day, you wake up with everything and realize you have nothing that truly knows you." Arya's throat tightened. "You are not beyond reaching," she said softly. "How do you know that?" "Because you are still asking questions." He stared at her then, with a gaze that seemed to see her not as a waitress, not as a charity case, not even as a novelty but as a mirror, someone who had nothing to offer him except truth. And perhaps that was the one thing no one else ever gave him. "Arya," he said, his voice quieter than before, "would you have dinner with me?" "Not here. Somewhere that is not lit by chandeliers." She blinked. "Are you asking me out?" "I am asking you for your time," he said, "without the apron, without the rules." She did not answer right away. Her heart was thudding too loudly. This could not be real. Men like Julian Blackthorne did not ask out waitresses from Queens, especially not ones who barely made rent and shared a 2-bedroom apartment with their grandmother. But something about the way he was looking at her made her believe it was not about status. It was about something raw and real and rare. "I will think about it," she said. His mouth curved slightly. "I will take that as a maybe." Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out several crisp bills. He placed them on the table, far more than any server at the Argent Lounge had ever received in a single tip. Arya stared at it. "I cannot accept that," she said quickly. "You already earned it," Julian replied. "Not for the service, for the conversation." She hesitated. "If I say yes to dinner," she said slowly, "it will not be because of the money. I would not want it to be." He stood then, elegant and quiet. The power that followed him out of the restaurant was still there, but it had softened. There was something different in the way he moved now, as if he were carrying something fragile, something new. And as he walked out into the night, Arya remained seated for a long time, her hands still cold around the cloth napkin she had twisted into a rose. She had served hundreds of customers in her life, men who tipped well, men who flirted poorly, men who barked orders. But none of them had ever looked at her like Julian Blackthorne had just done. Not like she was an escape. Not like she was a beginning. Epilogue to Part 1. What lingers in the silence. That night, Arya returned to her small apartment in Queens, climbing 4 flights of stairs in aching silence. Her legs were tired. Her shoes pinched. The scent of truffle and saffron still clung to her apron. Inside, her grandmother was watching television, knitting something pale blue. "You are home late, Mihija," Evelyn said gently. Arya smiled. It was a strange night. Good strange or bad strange? Arya hesitated, then whispered, both. Evelyn did not ask more. She only reached over, took Arya's hand, and squeezed it. Outside, the city continued to glow, but somewhere far above the chaos and steel, Julian Blackthorne sat alone in his penthouse, staring out at the skyline that he had once worshipped. For the first time in a long time, he was not thinking about profits or deadlines or shareholder expectations. He was thinking about a girl who had challenged him with nothing but truth, and how, when she smiled, it felt like something inside him was learning how to breathe again. Julian Blackthorne had been many things in his life: founder, CEO, investor, strategist, even predator in boardrooms filled with ambition. But tonight, he was something else. Nervous, he stood before the full-length mirror in his penthouse bedroom, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored charcoal shirt for the third time. His fingers moved automatically, but his mind was elsewhere, back in the restaurant, back at the booth where a waitress with emerald green eyes had managed to dismantle his defenses with nothing more than truth. Tonight, he would see her again, but not in the glow of the Argent Lounge, not behind a tray of orders, or beneath the watchful gaze of society. Tonight, it would be just the two of them. No titles, no obligations, just the weight of curiosity, and something heavier he was not yet ready to name. He checked his watch. 10 minutes until 7. The car was already waiting below. Across the city, Arya stood in front of the only mirror in her apartment, a small rectangle framed in cracked plastic, nailed to the hallway wall between the kitchen and the bathroom. She turned slightly, examining her reflection from different angles, frowning at her dress, then smoothing it again. It was navy blue, simple, knee-length, a second-hand purchase from a vintage shop 3 blocks away. She had chosen it because it made her feel grounded, not glamorous, but presentable, human. Her grandmother stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a mug of chamomile tea and watching her with eyes that saw everything. You look beautiful, me Hyger. Arya turned. Are you sure? It is not exactly. She hesitated, unsure how to finish the sentence. Not exactly what women wear when dating billionaires, Evelyn offered dryly. Arya laughed, though her nerves were still buzzing beneath her skin. Something like that. Her grandmother stepped closer, setting the mug down on the hallway table. He sees you, not your dress, not your shoes. You. But what if I do not fit in his world? Weller, what if I embarrass him? Evelyn's voice softened. You cannot embarrass someone who truly respects you, but you can lose yourself trying to impress someone who does not. Arya closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. You are right. There was a knock at the door. Every muscle in her body tensed. This was it. She opened the door slowly and found Julian standing there on it in his usual armor of black and navy suits, but in something quieter. Still expensive, still pristine, but softer. The first 2 buttons of his shirt were undone. His hair was less sculpted, more human. He looked at her and smiled. You look lovely, he said. You do not look like yourself, she replied. Good. That was the intention. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she accepted it. The car ride was silent at first, not awkward, but uncertain. They sat close, but not touching. New territory required new rules. Where are we going? Arya finally asked. Julian glanced sideways at her, eyes gleaming. Somewhere without crystal chandeliers. That is an extremely vague answer. It is also intentional. Arya raised an eyebrow but let it go. The car pulled off the main avenues into a quieter part of the city. Old brownstones replaced glass towers. Trees lined the sidewalks. Street lamps flickered with a golden glow that felt more like a memory than a light source. Eventually, the car stopped outside a narrow building that looked like it belonged to a different decade. The awning was simple. The windows were misted from warmth within. What is this place? Arya asked. A restaurant I invested in before I became what I am now, Julian said. It never went viral. It does not appear in luxury guides. But the chef remembers my name, and they will not stare at you when you walk in. Arya blinked. Do people stare at me? she asked quietly. Julian turned toward her. They do. Because you do not belong to the world they understand, and that unsettles them. Do I unsettle you? He held her gaze. Yes, completely. Arya could not help it smiled. Inside, the restaurant was warm and intimate. Soft jazz drifted through the air. The tables were made of wood that had been worn down by time, not by design. Candles flickered gently. The hostess greeted Julian like an old friend, and the chef waved from the kitchen passed through. No one blinked at Arya. No one whispered. No one pointed. They were just another couple on a quiet evening, and yet, something about the simplicity of it felt more intimate than anything either of them had experienced. They were seated near a window, tucked into a corner, far from the door. Julian held the menu but did not open it. I already know what I want, he said. I used to come here alone. It was the only place I did not feel like I had to be anyone. Arya traced her finger along the edge of the table. Do you always feel like you are performing? He nodded slowly. Every hour, every day. That sounds exhausting. It is. Arya did not push further. She let the silence breathe between them again. They placed their order shamid pasta for her, roasted sea bass for Hyman when the waitress left. Arya leaned forward slightly. What did you mean earlier? She asked. When you said you are not what you used to be. Julian looked down at his hands. I used to be hopeful, he said. I used to think money would solve everything: security, happiness, purpose. I thought once I reached a certain level of success, I could rest, be free. But I was wrong. What did you find instead? Isolation, expectations, and a constant fear of loss. Arya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think that is the worst kind of birth, one that follows you even when you have everything. Julian looked at her. How do you do that? Do what? Say the things I have only ever thought. Arya gave a small smile. Maybe we are not that different. I think we are from different universes, he replied. Then maybe this is what happens when two universes collide. The food arrived not long after, steaming, aromatic, unpretentious. Julian's sea bass rested on a bed of saffron couscous, delicately plated, but free of the usual pageantry. Arya's pasta was warm, creamy, dusted with fresh basil and parmesan. She took a bite, closing her eyes as the flavors melted across her tongue. This, she murmured, tastes like something made with care. Julian watched her, leaning forward just slightly. That is the difference, is it not, between something expensive and something valuable? Arya looked up. Most of my world, he continued, is expensive, rarely valuable. They ate in thoughtful silence for a few minutes, interrupted only by a soft laugh here or there, the occasional shared glance that lingered a little longer each time. Julian spoke first. Do you believe people can change? Arya set down her fork. I believe they can try. He nodded. That seems more honest than most answers I hear. You have surrounded yourself with people who are afraid to tell you the truth. Julian, that is the cost of power, and you are not afraid. I am terrified, she said honestly, but I also believe if we let fear decide everything, we miss the things worth fighting for. Julian's gaze darkened at it with anger, but with emotion. He was not used to this, to someone speaking to him as a man, not a symbol, and yet it grounded him, anchored him. Arya glanced out the window, her voice dropping. I keep waiting for the catch. He frowned. What do you mean? This dinner, you, all of it. Part of me wonders if I am just a temporary distraction from the loneliness. He did not deny it. I do not blame you for wondering, he said, but I will say this. If you were a distraction, I would not be sitting here, asking you questions about your dreams. Arya turned her gaze back to him. And if I were looking for fantasy, he added, I would not have asked you to wear what makes you feel comfortable. I wanted you to be exactly as you are. Her eyes softened. But before she could respond, the front door of the restaurant opened, and with it, a gust of cool air and a change in energy. A couple entered. Julian's posture stiffened instantly. Arya felt it before she even turned to look. The woman who walked through the door was stunning in a perfectly calculated way. Platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, a designer coat clinging to her statuesque frame, and high heels that clicked like metronomes across the wooden floor. Beside her was a man in a navy suit, smiling blandly. The hostess greeted them with polite warmth and began leading them to a table near the front. But the woman's eyes swept the room until they landed on Julian. She stopped. "Oh," she said, loud enough to be heard. "What a surprise." Julian's jaw clenched. Arya instinctively sat up straighter. The woman approached, dragging her date behind her like a handbag. "Julian," she purred. "How very nostalgic." "Patricia," Julian replied coolly. Arya's heart dropped. She had never heard that name before, but she knew immediately who the woman was. The ex-fiancée. Patricia turned her attention to Arya, her expression shifting into something sugar-coated but acidic. "And who is this?" Julian opened his mouth to answer, but Arya beat him to it. "I am Arya," she said with a calmness she did not feel. "A friend." Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that had claws hidden behind lipstick. "How charming," she said. Julian always did enjoy collecting interesting projects. Julian stood abruptly. "Patricia, this is not the time." "Oh, I am not interrupting," she said smoothly. "Just saying hello." It is always enlightening to see what people downgrade to when they are tired of polished perfection. Her eyes flicked to Arya's simple flats, then to her dress elegant, yes, but clearly not couture. Arya felt the flush rise to her cheeks, but she did not look away. Julian's voice dropped, sharp as glass. "Leave." Patricia raised a single brow. "So protective. That is new." Then she turned, pulling her companion with her, and allowed the hostess to seat them across the room. Arya sat in silence, her stomach suddenly tight. Julian turned back to her, but she could not quite meet his eyes. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "She should not have spoken to you that way." "It is fine," Arya replied, forcing a smile. "I have dealt with worse." But Julian saw it. The hesitation, the flicker of doubt. He reached across the table, not touching her hand, but placing his near hers. "She does not define this moment." "Are you?" Arya looked at him, unsure whether to speak the truth or hold it in. Eventually, she chose the truth. "She reminded me that I do not belong in your world." Julian's voice was firm. "That world is not my world anymore, but it still follows you. It shows up, it stares, it whispers." Julian did not respond for a moment. Then he said, "Come with me." Arya blinked. "What? Come, now." He stood, dropped several bills on the table, and offered her his hand. They exited into the night. Julian's driver opened the car door without a word. They drove in silence, this time not filled with nervous excitement, but something else, vulnerable uncertainty. 20 minutes later, the car stopped in front of a quiet building in Soho. Julian stepped out, then opened Arya's door. "This is one of my properties," he said. "I do not live here. No one does. But I keep it because it reminds me of who I used to be." They entered a small loft, open and filled with warm light. Brick walls, wooden beams, a grand piano in the corner, books stacked along the walls like old friends. The air smelled of cedar and old paper. Julian did not turn on any new lights. The soft golden glow from the floor lamps was enough. He turned to face her. "I brought you here because I needed you to see that the version of me Patricia knows the man of private jets and Geller invitations is not the only version." Arya walked slowly through the space, her fingers grazing a stack of music sheets. "You play?" she asked softly. "Used to." She turned. "Why did you stop?" Julian's gaze met hers. "Because I stopped feeling anything worth playing for." There was silence again. He stepped closer, not touching her, but standing near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I do not want to lose this," he said. "Whatever it is." Arya nodded. "Neither do I." He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing hers. "Then let us not let the past decide the future." She looked up at him, and for the first time that night, truly believed it was possible. The ride home was quieter than the ride to dinner, but not because there was nothing left to say. In fact, Arya felt there was too much. Her chest felt full of words, of questions, of emotions that had no names yet. Julian had shown her something tonight, something that broke past the layers of power and performance. He had let her see the man beneath the reputation, and perhaps more importantly, he had seen her. She stepped out of the car slowly in front of her apartment building. Julian followed, walking her to the entrance as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You do not have to come up," she said gently. "I know," he replied, "but I would like to." Arya hesitated, but only for a moment. Then she nodded. Inside the small apartment, everything felt unchanged, and yet, to Arya, it somehow seemed smaller, like her world had stretched tonight, and this space could no longer contain all that she felt. Her grandmother looked up from the kitchen table, knitting needles in hand, eyes sharp with curiosity. "Well," Evelyn said, "I was beginning to wonder if I needed to call the police." Arya laughed. "It went longer than I expected." Julian smiled as he stepped forward. "Mrs. Bennett, I am Julian Blackthorne." Evelyn's eyes narrowed playfully. "So you are the one who has my granddaughter glowing like a spring bulb." Julian chuckled, extending his hand. "I suppose I am." Evelyn shook it firmly. "Come in, then. If you are going to steal her away from me, I would at least like to see what I am losing her to." They sat in the small living room, which doubled as a dining space. Julian was too tall for the couch, but he folded himself gracefully, setting his hands neatly on his lap. Arya made tea, pouring steaming mugs, while her grandmother launched into a gentle but thorough interrogation. "You are a businessman?" "Yes." "You are wealthy?" Julian hesitated. "Yes." "You are not married?" "No." Evelyn sipped her tea. "Good. I have no patience for infidelity. What are your intentions toward my granddaughter?" Julian blinked. Arya nearly choked on her drink, but Julian did not flinch. He met Evelyn's gaze directly. "My intentions," he said slowly, "are to understand who she is, to learn what makes her laugh, what breaks her heart, what she dreams about when she is alone, and to earn her trust. If she will let me." Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "You may stay for another cup." Arya laughed, and for the first time in years, felt something close to peace. Later that evening, after Julian had left, Arya sat in her room in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Evelyn knocked softly before entering. "Can I say something?" her grandmother asked. "Always. I like him." Arya turned her head. "Really? He is still learning how to be human," Evelyn said gently. "But he is trying. That matters." Arya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I am falling for him." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and placed her warm hand over Arya's. "Then fall with your eyes open, me Hyger. Because love like this, love that crosses worlds, it is not just about romance. It is about courage." The next few days passed like something out of a story Arya had never imagined herself in. Julian texted her every morning, sent flowers to the restaurant, not expensive roses, but wildflowers in simple glass jars, picked her up after late shifts just to make sure she did not ride the subway home alone. He did not try to dazzle her with wealth. Instead, he tried to be present, to listen, to learn, and Arya found herself unfolding, like a book left unopened too long, her pages stretching in sunlight she had forgotten how to feel. But the world around them was beginning to take notice. One afternoon, as she was wiping down menus at the Argent Lounge, she overheard the servers whispering near the bar. "Did you see the photos?" "What photos?" "Of Arya, with Julian. They are all over one of those gossip blogs. They called her the girl from nowhere." Arya froze. She stepped into the staff room and pulled out her phone, fingers trembling. There it was, a blurry photo of her and Julian leaving the restaurant in Soho. Another of him opening the car door for her. The headlines were cruel. Tech King Julian Blackthorne spotted with mystery waitress temporary amusement or real interest. Cinderella or gold digger. Arya's stomach twisted. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to laugh. But most of all, she wanted to disappear. That evening, she did not wait for Julian to pick her up. She walked home alone, her coat pulled tightly round her, head down. When she entered the apartment, Evelyn looked up immediately. "You saw it." Arya nodded. "Are you going to call him?" "I do not know." "Do you think he is behind it?" "No, Arya said firmly. But it does not matter. His world will always find me. Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, so will he. She was right. Julian showed up at the door less than an hour later. His eyes were tired, his jaw tight. I am sorry, he said the moment she opened the door. I did not want this. I never wanted you to be dragged into that part of my life. Arya looked at him, the hurt still raw in her chest. You promised me I would not have to pretend, she said. But now everyone is trying to make me into something I am not. Julian stepped forward. Then let me do something they cannot ignore. He pulled out his phone. Arya frowned. What are you doing? Fixing it. The next day, an article was posted on Julian's official social media account. It was short. It read, the woman in the photographs is Arya Bennett. She is not a project, not a secret. She is someone I deeply admire and care for. Her kindness humbles me. Her honesty grounds me. Her presence reminds me of who I want to Bennett just in business. But in life, I ask that she be treated with the respect she has earned simply by being exactly who she is. The statement Julian had posted spread through the digital world like wildfire. Articles that had once speculated about Arya's intentions now pivoted. Some cautiously praising Julian's transparency, others fixating on the novelty of a billionaire defending a waitress. At the Argent Lounge, the atmosphere changed. Some patrons looked at Arya with fascination, others with envy, and a few with quiet disapproval veiled in polite smiles. Whispers followed her as she moved from table to table. But Margot had made it clear to the staff, any disrespect would not be tolerated. Still, Arya felt the weight of it all. Visibility came with a cost. She had once been invisible in this world. Now she felt like she was on display in a museum where everyone whispered their judgments behind the glass. Julian, for his part, became more present than ever. He visited her after work, never unannounced. He brought her books, not jewelry stories that had shaped his childhood. He met Evelyn again, this time with fresh flowers, and a story about how he used to sell lemonade on street corners in Brooklyn. But the scrutiny did not fade. Some of Julian's board members began to grumble. Whispers of distraction and emotional instability found their way to the press. An anonymous source claimed Julian was compromising company priorities for a romantic entanglement. Share prices dipped by 0.5%, not a large drop, but one that made people nervous. Julian called an emergency meeting. Arya never knew exactly what was said, only that afterward, two board members resigned quietly, and the company issued a statement reaffirming their trust in their CEO. That night, Julian knocked on Arya's door looking exhausted, his tie askew and his eyes storm-dark. I am not going to ask you to be patient, he said as soon as she opened the door, because you have already been more patient than I deserve. But I will ask you to hold on just a little longer. Arya stepped aside without a word and let him in. They sat on the old couch. Evelyn was asleep in her room. The apartment was quiet. Arya took Julian's hand. I never needed you to protect me from the world, she said softly. I just needed to know that when the world pushed, you would not let go. Julian turned to her, eyes raw. I will not. A beat passed, then another. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, not for a ring, not for jewelry, but for a folded envelope. What is that? He handed it to her. Inside was a property deed. To what? To a building, Julian said. In Queens, 5 blocks from here. I bought it from an old bakery owner. It has a working kitchen, a back patio, and enough space for 10 tables. Arya stared at the paper, her mouth dry. I want to help you build your cafe, Julian said. Not as a gift, as a partner. Arya's throat tightened. Julian, this is... I know, he interrupted gently. It is a lot, and if you say no, I will respect that. But I want you to know that I am not just interested in your dreams. I believe in them. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at the deed again, then at him, and then she nodded. They named Evelyn's table. A month later, it opened to a crowd that did not care about money or fame. They came for the warmth, for the food, for the feeling that someone had created this place with love, not profit. Arya managed the floor with the grace of someone who had walked every path to get there. Julian came by every evening it to inspect, but to serve, sometimes even wash dishes. The regulars loved him, especially when they realized he knew how to fold napkins into roses. The media stopped calling. The world turned to the next headline. But inside Evelyn's table, something rare had taken root. A love that had been tested not by tragedy, but by truth. A connection born not from rescue, but from recognition. And a promise not of perfection, but of presence. Closing scene of part 2. It was near midnight. Arya stood behind the counter, wiping down the last hiccup. Julian approached from the back, sleeves rolled, apron smudged with flour. "You missed a spot," he teased. She looked up and smiled. "So did you. Your collar is lopsided." He reached up to fix it, but her hands were faster. She adjusted it gently, her fingers brushing the side of his neck. "You are really here," she whispered. Julian looked down at her. "I have always been here," he said. "You are just the first person who saw me." He kissed her, then soft, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that does not need a fairy tale, because it already built its own world. Morning sunlight poured through the front windows of Evelyn's table, casting long golden beams across the hard wood floor. The scent of fresh cinnamon rolls wafted through the space, mingling with soft jazz playing low from an old speaker tucked behind the pastry display. It was early stillingly. A few regulars had wandered in for coffee and morning quiet. Arya moved behind the counter with practiced grace, tying her apron, flipping open the register, and smiling as she greeted familiar faces. There was warmth in her rhythm now, and ease that had not been there months ago. She no longer walked with the invisible weight of not belonging. This cafe, this small corner of the city, was hers, built with her heart, and held up by Julian's hands. She looked up to see him walk in through the back entrance, sleeves rolled, shirt and tucked in a way that made him look less like a billionaire and more like the man she had first seen sitting alone in the booth of a high-end restaurant. Guarded and quiet, he held a crate of fresh produce from the local market and placed it gently on the counter. "They overcharged us for the tomatoes again," he said. "I negotiated, got a free basket of strawberries in return." Arya smirked. "Only you would negotiate at a farmer's market." Julian leaned against the counter. "They respect conviction." She reached into the crate, lifting one of the strawberries to her lips. "They probably fear you." Same outcome. Their smiles were easy, their connection steady, but underneath it all, change was circling, quiet but certain. Julian had been distracted lately. Longer calls, hushed conversations, glances at his phone when he thought she would not notice. And Arya noticed. She always noticed, but she did not push. Not yet. That afternoon, after closing, they sat together on the back patio of the cafe. Arya had pulled off her apron and slipped on a soft gray cardigan. Julian nursed a cup of black coffee, staring out at the ivy that curled along the brick wall. "I need to tell you something," he said. Arya set her cup down. "All right, I have been offered a position." "Well, not a position, an expansion." "Of what?" "Blackthorn Systems. They want to open an international headquarters in Zurich. The board wants me there, in person, for the first year at least." Arya's throat tightened. "When?" "In 3 weeks." She nodded slowly. "I see." Julian watched her carefully. "I have not accepted. I needed to talk to you first." She appreciated that. She did, but it did not soften the sting. "Would it mean leaving everything here behind?" she asked. "No," he said quickly, "not permanently, but yes, I would be gone for months, maybe longer, and Evelyn's table, I can still fund it, support it from afar. The vision does not disappear if I am not here." Arya looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. "And what about me?" she whispered. Julian's voice was quiet. "That is what I do not know how to answer yet." Silence fell, the kind of silence that felt too big for the space between two people. That evening, Evelyn coughed through dinner, not just a light tickle but a deep, rattling cough that left her breathless and pale. Arya rushed to her side, helping her into bed, wrapping her in layers, taking her temperature with trembling hands. Julian called a doctor, a private one. He arrived within the hour. The diagnosis came gently, but it hit like a hammer. Pulmonary complications. Nothing new, but worsened by stress and exhaustion. She would need rest, medication, close care. After the doctor left, Arya sat beside her grandmother's bed, holding her thin hand. Evelyn's eyes were bright despite the weakness in her body. "You should not look so afraid," she murmured. "I am not afraid," Arya lied. Evelyn smiled faintly. "You love him." "Yes, and he loves you." "I know." "Then you must let him go." Arya blinked. "What?" "For now," Evelyn said, "if you try to hold onto tightly, it will only break what you built." "I am afraid if I let go," Arya whispered, "he will not come back." Then he was never yours to begin with. That night, Julian stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the wind teasing the edges of his sleeves. He stared at the skyline, his empire, built with determination, shaped with sacrifice, and yet nothing in the horizon felt as real as the woman sleeping beside her grandmother in Queens. He pulled out his phone and dialed. The days that followed passed like a slow march through fog. Julian had not yet made his final decision, but in Arya's heart, she sensed the direction of the wind. He was being pulled towards Rick, toward expansion, toward the machine that had always defined him. And Shesh was rooted here, not by fear, but by choice. The cafe had become her pulse, her purpose. The customers knew her name. Children waved through the window on their way to school. Elderly couples sat in their usual corner and asked for whatever Arya recommends today. Evenings were reserved for Evelyn, whose health remained delicate. Arya gave her tea, warm compresses, and patience. Some nights, they talked for hours. Other nights, Evelyn simply asked her to sit nearby, in silence. Through it all, Julian was present in strange ways. He sent soup when the cafe ran out. He had a small heater installed on the back patio before the weather turned cold. He sent Evelyn flowers, and books, and soft scarves that arrived in unmarked boxes with no notes, but always perfect timing. But he did not speak of Zurich again, not until a week later. It was late, nearly midnight. Julian stood at the cafe entrance, rain dripping from his coat. Arya had just finished mopping the floors. She opened the door and stepped aside. He entered quietly, shaking the water from his sleeves. "I leave in 5 days," he said simply. Arya nodded. "I wanted to see you tonight, because I need to say something clearly." He walked closer, stopping just short of touching her. "This is not goodbye," he said. "This is not the end of anything." Arya looked into his eyes. They were storm-filled, beautiful, exhausted. "How can you be so sure?" she asked. "Because for the first time in my life, I know what it is like to want something more than success." Her throat tightened. "I love you, Arya," Julian said, his voice rough with honesty. "And I will come back, not because I promised to, but because I need to." Arya nodded once. "I believe you," she whispered. They stood in the center of the darkened cafe, wrapped not in arms, but in silence and a promise. That night, he did not stay, and neither of them slept. The day Julian left, Arya did not go to the airport. She stayed in the cafe, serving coffee, wiping counters, and answering the same question from every customer. "Where is the tall man today?" She smiled and said, "On a trip." And when they asked, "Will he be back?" she replied, "Yes." Even when she was not certain, she kept replying, "Yes." The first week without him was the hardest. Her hands missed the feeling of his fingertips brushing her wrist. Her ears missed the quiet cadence of his voice late at night. Her heart missed the grounding presence of someone who had once felt unreachable, but had chosen to stand beside her anyway. They spoke by phone, but the calls were short. Julian was buried in meetings. The time zone difference did not help. Some nights, she heard his voice and barely recognized the strain in it. He sounded tired, older, distant. Still, he never failed to ask, "And how is Evelyn?" and always ended the call with, "I love you." Arya did not let herself cry, not during business hours. not in front of her grandmother, not even when she was alone in bed. Instead, she poured herself into the cafe. She painted the menu board by hand. She started offering a comfort special for customers who looked like they needed it. She taught a young teenager how to make proper foam on cappuccinos. And she wrote in her journal every night, letters, but she never sent them. Then, one Wednesday evening, a courier arrived. He was wearing a thick coat, carrying a carefully wrapped box, and handed it to her without a word. Inside was a simple envelope, heavy paper, her name written in Julian's handwriting. She opened it with shaking fingers. Arya, I am writing this by hand because typing feels too impersonal for what I want to say. I do not want to be here. Not because Zurich is unkind. Not because the expansion is unimportant. But because everything here feels muted without you. As though I have taken my eyes off the only thing that makes the horizon meaningful. I keep thinking about your hands. How they move when you wipe down the counter. The way you hold your mug like it is something sacred. The way your fingertips touch the piano that first night. I miss those details more than anything. I have sent something with this letter. It is not meant to impress you. It is meant to be a small piece of me. Until I can return fully, all my thoughts are with you, Julian. Beneath the letter, wrapped in a silk cloth, was a music box. When Arya opened it, a quiet melody spilled into the room, haunting, beautiful, and familiar. It was the lullaby she had hummed once, months ago, on the balcony of the cafe while closing up. Julian had asked her what it was. She had told him it was something her mother used to sing before the accident. He had remembered. She held the music box to her chest, and this time, she allowed herself to cry. The cafe remained open 7 days a week. The rhythm of life returned, but it no longer hummed in harmony. Without Julian, the world moved slightly offbeat for Arya. She worked, she smiled, she cared for Evelyn, who had good days and difficult ones. She filled the space he left behind with motion and service and long walks in the early morning, when the streets were still quiet enough to imagine his voice beside her. But nothing truly filled the absence, until one Sunday afternoon, nearly 6 weeks since Julian had left. Everything changed. It began with a phone call. Evelyn had been resting in her room. Arya was kneading dough in the cafe kitchen, humming softly along to a playlist Julian had once built for her. The cafe phone rang. She wiped her hands quickly and answered. Evelyn's table. This is Arya. A pause. Then a voice she did not recognize. Urgent and professional. Miss Bennett, my name is Caroline Law. I am Mr. Blackthorn's executive assistant in Zurich. I apologize for calling you directly, but something has happened. Arya's body went still. Is he? No, he's alive, Caroline said quickly. There was an incident, a car accident, not severe, but significant enough. He was discharged this morning, against medical advice. And no, he's gone. Gone. He left his phone, his briefcase. No one knows where he is. Arya's heart thudded. Are you saying he has disappeared? We believe he boarded a flight to New York, but he was not scheduled. He left without informing anyone. Arya was already reaching for her coat. He arrived that night, just past midnight. Rain fell in a steady hush against the windows. Arya had stayed in the cafe after close, wiping down the same spot on the counter for over an hour. She told herself it was to stay busy, but the truth was, she was waiting. And when the bell above the door chimed, she knew. Julian stood there, sick to the bone, hair disheveled, face pale but breathing. Alive, Arya rushed forward without thinking, wrapping her arms around him, pressing her head to his chest. He held her tightly, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. I could not stay away, he whispered. She pulled back enough to look at him. What happened? I was driving back from the embassy, he said. I was distracted, thinking about you. I lost control. The car hit a divider. No one else was involved. But the second could not stay there. I realized I was building something again that did not include you, and I could not do that a second time. Arya cupped his cheek gently. I thought I lost you. You almost did, he admitted. Not to death, but to the old version of me. She stepped back, guiding him toward the fireplace near the back wall. She handed him a towel and hot tea, and they sat on the small bench together as the rain tapped the roof. I do not want to be in Zurich, Julian said. Not without you. Not without this place. Not without something real to hold onto. You do not need to leave the company behind, Arya said carefully, but you do need to choose how you live. I already have, he replied, and I choose this. You, Evelyn, the cafe, a life that does not cost me myself. She smiled, slow and full of relief. And I choose you, she whispered. The next day, the papers screamed his name. Blackthorn abandons expansion seen back in NYC. From boardrooms to bakeries. What is Julian Blackthorn doing? Is love the reason behind a billion-dollar retreat? Julian did not respond to any of them. Instead, he bought out the Zurich expansion quietly, handing leadership to a trusted colleague. He returned full-time to New York, but not to the skyscrapers, to the corner cafe with the mismatched chairs and handwritten menus, to Arya, and to the version of himself he had always longed to become. 2 weeks later, they left the city. Julian did not make a grand announcement, nor did he take Arya away in a limousine. Instead, he rented a modest cottage 2 hours north of Manhattan, nestled in a quiet patch of forest by a slow-moving river. No cell service, no meetings, no cameras, only stillness. And them, he drove. Arya sat beside him, one hand on his thigh, the other resting against the window pane, watching the skyline dissolve behind them. Evelyn sat in the back seat, a shawl draped over her shoulders, humming quietly to herself. They arrived just before sunset. The cottage was small, made of worn cedar and warm stone. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. A fireplace crackled to life as Julian stacked logs expertly, while Arya unpacked tea and bread and Evelyn curled into an armchair with a blanket and a sigh of relief. That night, under a sky that shimmered with stars unobscured by city light, Julian and Arya sat on the porch in silence. It had been days since they truly talked deeply, without distraction. Since Zurich, the world had been rushing again. Now, finally, they had stopped. Julian broke the silence first. Can I ask you something I have been afraid to? Arya turned toward him. Always. He hesitated, not because he doubted the question but because the answer would matter. If I had never walked into that restaurant, he said, if I had never sat down at your table, would we still have found each other? Arya smiled faintly. No. Julian blinked. But I would have met someone like you, she added. Someday, in some form, maybe not a billionaire, maybe not wearing a suit, but I would have met someone who made me brave. He stared at her. And you, she asked, if you had not ordered risotto with no mushrooms, if you had not made everyone else too scared to speak, would you have found me? He was quiet for a moment. No, he said finally. I would have kept climbing, kept pretending the altitude did not make it harder to breathe. Arya reached for his hand. You were never cold, she whispered. You were just alone. He looked down at their fingers intertwined. And now, you are still a little cold, she teased. He laughed softly, then his voice turned quiet. Serious. I may never be perfect at this, at life, our love, our balance, but I wake up every day and I want to get better. Not because I need to be worthy of you, but because I want to be. Arya leaned her head on his shoulder. I do not want perfection, she said. I want presence. I want someone who stays, who chooses me, even when it is hard. Especially then. Julian kissed the top of her head. Then let me show you. One day at a time. The next morning, Arya awoke to the smell of coffee. Julian was in the kitchen, wearing a borrowed flannel shirt, pouring 2 mugs. Evelyn was already outside, feeding birds with a content smile. When Arya stepped onto the porch, Julian handed her the coffee, then pulled something from his pocket. Not a ring, not a necklace, a small, folded slip of paper. She opened it. On it were just 4 words. Today, I choose you. No diamonds, no kneeling, no promises etched in gold. Just a declaration, quit, intentional, alive. Arya looked at him, eyes glistening, and replied, "I choose you too." It began, as many turning points do, in perfect quiet. Evelyn's table had found its rhythm, its heartbeat steady. Familiar, the morning rush arrived like clockwork. Teachers grabbing coffee before school, parents juggling toddlers and oat milk lattes, elderly neighbors swapping newspapers and smiles. The afternoons brought a different energy, slow, warm, comforting. Julian called them the golden hours. But the real change came after dark. Every Wednesday evening, the cafe stayed open, not for profit, but for people. Arya had started a tradition: community supper night, free meals for those in need, no sign-up, no ID checks, just open doors, warm food, and human dignity. Julian watched her from behind the counter that first night, his chest tight with something he could not name. Not pride, exactly. Something deeper, something like awe. She moved from table to table, laughing with strangers, remembering names. She knelt beside a child who had never eaten roasted carrots before and gently explained how to hold a spoon properly. Julian, in his white shirt now streaked with tomato sauce, served soup with both hands and accepted high fives from children sticky with jam. "I never thought this place would become what it is," Arya said later, as they stood side by side washing dishes. Julian looked at her, suds dripping from his sleeves. "I think this place became what you are." She turned to him, eyes glinting. "Then what are you?" He kissed the corner of her mouth. Still learning. The next morning, the wind carried the smell of rain before the clouds arrived. Arya was pouring coffee for Evelyn when Julian received a text. "Unknown number. We need to talk. You cannot avoid blood forever." He stared at the screen, then locked the phone. Later that week, Julian stood on the sidewalk outside the cafe, arms crossed, eyes scanning the street like a man preparing for a storm. And the storm came in the form of Nathaniel Blackthorne, older by 5 years. Taller, broader, his features bore the same sharp bone structure as Julian's, but his eyes were colder, less guarded, more dangerous. A man who had seen every boardroom, every betrayal, and had come to expect them. He wore a suit that cost more than the espresso machine inside Evelyn's table, and he smiled like someone who knew how to weaponize charm. Julian did not offer a handshake. "You should not be here," he said flatly. Nathaniel glanced at the sign above the door. "Evelyn's table. That is new." "You are not welcome." "I never am," Nathaniel replied, stepping forward. "But that has never stopped me before." Julian blocked the entrance. "Say what you came to say." Nathaniel's smile thinned. "I came to offer you something. A merger. Our companions together again. But this time, with you in a chair." I step back. "You lead. Full reign. Global scale." Julian blinked. Nathaniel continued. "I am walking away from the fight, offering peace, redemption, power." Julian's voice was quiet. "You never offer peace unless you plan to burn something down first." Nathaniel shrugged. "You cannot hide behind cafes and charity dinners forever, little brother. The world will come calling. Let it knock," Julian said. "I will not answer." Nathaniel glanced through the cafe window. Arya was laughing with a customer, hair pulled back in a loose braid, flour on her cheek. He said. "So this is what softened you." Julian stepped closer, voice sharp. "Leave now." But Nathaniel's eyes lingered on Arya. "You do realize, eventually, she will wonder why you never told her about me." Julian's throat tightened. "She will ask why you erased your past. She does not need to carry the weight of it. But you think she is strong enough to stand beside you in everything else?" Nathaniel asked, tone mocking. "And yet too fragile to know the truth?" Julian said nothing. Nathaniel took a step back. "My offer stands for 10 days, he said. "After that, the choice becomes mine again." And then he was gone. That night, Julian said nothing to Arya. He sat across from her at dinner, fingers fidgeting with the rim of his glass. Evelyn noticed, but said nothing. When Arya kissed his temple and leaned her head on his shoulder, he closed his eyes and wished silence could hold back time. 3 days passed. Julian tried to pretend nothing had changed. He still showed up early to grind beans, still help Evelyn with crossword puzzles after the lunch rush, still touched the small of Arya's back when he passed behind her, still whispered, "I love you" every night when they closed the cafe together. But something had shifted. A shadow had entered the room, quiet, but present, the kind of shadow that does not cast darkness on the floor, but in the spaces between people. Arya felt it. She just did not yet know its name until she found the photograph. It happened on a Thursday morning, while searching for extra napkins in the office storage cabinet. The drawer stuck as always. Arya pulled harder. Something inside gave way, sending a small envelope tumbling to the floor. She bent to pick it up, expecting old invoices. But what spilled out was a photograph. Two boys, one taller, arms crossed, chin lifted defiantly. The author Julian slightly younger, eyes shaded by distrust, but standing close. The resemblance was clear. Brothers. Behind them, a building she recognized from financial news segments. Blackthorn Holdings, the global firm Julian had once co-founded. Before walking away without explanation, Arya stared at the picture, her fingers tightening on its edges. She had never seen this man, never heard his name, and Julian had never mentioned a brother. She returned the envelope without a sound, but the silence it left behind roared in her ears. That evening, after the cafe had closed, Arya stood in the kitchen rinsing a dish that had already been cleaned for 5 minutes. Her movements were slow, measured. Julian walked in, took one look at her face, and stopped. "You knew I would find it," she said without turning. He did not speak. "You left it where I would go eventually. A cabinet you knew I hated, a drawer that always sticks." He stepped forward. "I did not mean for it to be hidden," she interrupted. "Because it was." Julian exhaled. "His name is Nathaniel. He is my older brother. I figured that much." They stood there, the air between them thick. Arya turned to face him. "Why did you not tell me?" Julian hesitated. "Because that part of my life, Jaime, is not something I want in our story. But it is part of your story," she said. "Which means, by default, it is part of mine now too." He looked down. Arya's voice trembled. "You promised me honesty, not perfection, not vulnerability on command, just truth. And this feels like a hole I never saw coming." Julian stepped closer, but she held up a hand. "Please, just tell me everything." So he did. In halting, careful detail, Julian told her about the early year show he and Nathaniel had built their first company together. How Nathaniel had taken their parents' death hard, channeling grief into relentless expansion. How power had changed him. How Julian had walked away, not just from the company, but from the man who once shared his blood. "I told myself that chapter was closed," Julian said quietly, "until he showed up last week." And two froze. "I did not know how to tell you. I was ashamed." Arya's eyes were glassy. "Not of having a brother," Julian added, "but of what I became when I was near him." She said nothing for a long moment. "Then, do you think I would have left if you had told me?" "No." "Then why treat me like someone too fragile to carry the truth?" Julian's silence was answer enough. Arya swallowed. "Do you want to rebuild a relationship with him?" "I do not know," Julian said honestly. "He offered a merger, a seat at the table again, a chance to lead the global company we once dreamed of. And you, I have everything I want right here." Arya's jaw clenched. "Then tell him that." "I did," Julian said. Her eyes searched his face for confirmation, and he added, "But I do not know if he believes me." Arya turned away. "Do you?" Julian paused. "I believe you are the only thing that makes me want to stay who I am now." She nodded, but she did not say another word that night. Later, in the quiet of their shared bedroom, Julian lay awake beside her. He did not reach for her hand, and she did not offer hers. Sometimes, the greatest distance between two people is not miles. It is unspoken truths. The following Sunday afternoon, Evelyn's table was quieter than usual. Rain drifted softly against the windows. The smell of fresh rosemary bread and steeping mint tea lingered in the air. Arya stood behind the counter, distractedly wiping clean cups that were already spotless. Julian was out on an errand surprise delivery for the community shelter they were sponsoring that week. Evelyn sat near the window, knitting slowly, eyes trained on the street like a silent sentinel. When the bell above the door rang, Arya looked up expecting a neighbor. Instead, Nathaniel Blackthorne stepped in. No suit this time, just dark jeans and a wool coat, but the same cold poise. Evelyn's knitting paused. Nathaniel looked directly at Arya. "You and I need to talk." Arya stiffened. "Julian is not here. I know. I have nothing to say to you. I am not here to talk about the merger," Nathaniel said. "I am here to give you a truth I am tired of watching Julian live without." Arya hesitated, still standing behind the counter. Nathaniel's eyes darkened, but his tone remained calm. "You think he walked away from me because of money, or greed, or betrayal?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small folder, worn and slightly bent. "He walked away because I let him believe something about himself that was never true." He set the folder down on the counter and stepped back. Arya stared at it. "Tell him, or do not. It is your choice," Nathaniel said. "But just know this me brother is not the man he thinks he is. And it is your name he whispers when he is in doubt." Before she could respond, he turned and left, rain swallowing him whole. Arya did not open the folder right away. She stared at it for a full minute, then another. Finally, with trembling fingers, she unfolded the flap. Inside were photocopies of a will, old, dated 15 years ago, and with it, a letter, handwritten, faded with each. "Julian, if you are reading this, it means Nathaniel chose silence. As I feared, you were always the more principled of the two, the quieter one, the one who would carry pain alone rather than confront it. I admired that, even as it terrified me. You were never just Nathaniel's shadow. You were our legacy's best hope. The truth is, I left Blackthorne Holdings to you, not because you needed it, but because you earned it. And if Nathaniel kept that from you, it is because he feared what you might become with the truth. Forgive him, if you can, but do not let him define your past any longer." "Father," Arya felt the air vanish from her lungs. This changed everything. Julian had walked away from the company out of guilt, out of conflict. He had believed he was abandoning something that never belonged to him. But the truth was far more cruel. It had been his all along, and someone he trusted once chose to bury that truth. She closed the folder carefully, then turned to find Evelyn watching her. "Secrets age poorly," her grandmother said softly, "like bread left in the sun." Arya nodded. "I need to tell him." "Yes," Evelyn said, "but not until you are certain you are telling him for him, not for you." That night, Julian returned home soaked from the rain. His cheeks were flushed from the wind, a paper bag of scones in his hand. Arya met him at the door. "I need to show you something," she said gently. They sat at the kitchen table. She placed the folder between them. Julian stared at it, unmoving, then slowly reached for it. When he read the letter, his expression did not change, only his eyes. Those steel gray eyes filled with a kind of hurt that was quiet and infinite. He set the letter down after several long minutes. He knew, Julian whispered. Arya reached for his hand. "I am so sorry." He knew I would never ask, that I would rather suffer in silence than confront Nathaniel. "And Nathaniel let you believe the lie." Julian nodded slowly. "All this time, I thought I had walked away, but I was pushed." "And now?" Arya asked. "What will you do with the truth?" He looked at her, voice low. "I will not let it define me, not anymore, but I need to see him again, not to rebuild anything, just to close the chapter myself." Arya nodded. "I will be here when you do." Julian met Nathaniel in a quiet corner of Central Park, under a canopy of rust-colored trees that had begun shedding the last of their leaves. The air smelled of wet bark and cold wind. Nathaniel arrived late. He always had. Julian stood without speaking, hands in the pockets of his long gray coat. When Nathaniel finally appeared, he looked more weathered than before. Something in his eyes suggested he already knew what was coming. "You read the letter," he said flatly. "I did." Nathaniel sighed, stuffing his hands in his coat. I kept it from you because I thought you would ruin it. The company, the legacy. Julian's jaw clenched. It was not yours to protect. No, but it was all I had left. Julian stepped forward, his voice low but steady. You do not get to dress betrayal as responsibility. Nathaniel looked away. I am not here to fight, Julian said. I am not here to make you confess, or beg, or apologize. I am here to say something clearly. For me, he met his brother's eyes. I forgive you, he said, not because you deserve it, but because I will not carry this any longer. Nathaniel blinked, something flickered across his face, but he did not speak. Julian stepped back. We are not brothers, not anymore, but I hope someday you remember who we were before ambition turned love into war. And then he left, not out of anger, but with peace in his chest for the first time in years. Back at the cafe, Arya sat beside Evelyn's hospital bed, her fingers curled around her grandmother's pale hand. The monitors beeped softly. A warm cup of chamomile tea sat and touched on the tray. Evelyn had collapsed that morning, a sudden shortness of breath, a quiet fall to the floor that felt like the sky itself cracking. The doctors said it was a minor heart attack, manageable, treatable, but serious. Arya had not cried yet. She did not know how. Instead, she whispered stories of childhood, of Julian showing up that first night, of their first community dinner. She spoke like she was stringing pearls onto a necklace she could wear round her heart forever. Evelyn stirred, her eyes opened, weak but shining. Mihija, she murmured. Arya leaned closer. You stayed, always. Evelyn managed a smile. He is coming back. Arya nodded. I see it in your eyes. You already chose him. Yes, Arya said softly. Even when I am scared. Evelyn closed her eyes again. That is how you know it is real. Julian arrived just before sunset. He did not speak when he entered the room. He simply walked to Arya's side, kissed her forehead, and took Evelyn's other hand. They stayed like that for a long while. 3 generations, 2 worlds, 1 heartbeat. Later, outside in the hospital courtyard, Arya and Julian sat on a bench beneath a tree shedding its last golden leaves. Arya finally spoke. I thought I might lose her today. Julian nodded. I did too. I do not know what I would have done if you were not here. Julian took her hand. You would have stood strong, the way you always do. But I do not want to be strong without you, she whispered. Not anymore. Julian turned to her. I have something to ask, he said, but not with a ring, not with a proposal, just with a promise. She looked at him. I want to build a life where every day we choose each other, not once, not for show, not for vows recited in front of others, but in the silence of mornings, in the middle of arguments, in hospital rooms, in small, invisible ways. Arya's eyes shimmered. And if one day, he continued, you cannot find the words, I will say them for you. And if one day, I lose my way again, I want you to be the one to remind me who I became beside you. She pulled him close and kissed him long, slow, grounded. When their foreheads rested together, she whispered, then let us begin again. Every single day. 6 months had passed since the hospital nights and the whispered promises. Spring had arrived in the city. Evelyn's table was now to cafes. The original location remained in Queen, still cozy, still full of familiar faces and mismatched chairs. But across the bridge, nestled at the corner of a tree-lined street in Brooklyn Heights, a second Evelyn's table had opened its doors. This time, Arya was the one holding the keys. Julian had insisted it would be her project, not because he lacked faith in her, but because he had too much of it. He wanted her vision to take root without his shadow shaping it. He still supported the logistics, the legalities, the numbers. But this soul, that was hers. From the wallpaper patterned with vines and morning glorious to the recipe cards handwritten by Evelyn and framed along the wall, the new cafe was a love letter to warmth, honesty, and quiet resilience. Opening day was a quiet triumph. Arya stood behind the register in a soft linen apron, hair twisted into a low bun, fingers lightly dusted with flour. her staff mostly young, mostly first-timers buzzed with nervous energy. Julian arrived just before noon. He did not make a speech. He simply took a seat at the corner table by the window, ordered a black coffee and a cinnamon bun, and watched her with the kind of pride that needed no announcement. It should have been perfect. And it was, for a while, until the past walked through the door. It was Thursday afternoon when Arya saw him. The cafe was half full, lights spill across the tile floor. Arya was arranging tulips in a vase when the bell above the door rang. She looked up, and time bent inward. He looked older, taller maybe, broader, but it was him. Marcus Layden, the first boy she had ever loved. The boy who had once held her hand through the worst winter of her life, and the boy who had left without saying goodbye. Their eyes met across the room. Arya's hands froze around the vase. He smiled, hesitant. "Hi, Arya." It was the same voice, the same softness. Arya felt the breath catch in her throat. She set the vase down carefully. "Marcus." He stepped forward, not too close. "I heard about the cafe. I live a few blocks away now. I thought I would stop in." Arya nodded, unsure what to say. Silence stretched between them. "I will keep this quick," Marcus added. "I just wanted to say I am sorry. For back then," Arya blinked. "I was young, scared, and I did not know how to be there for someone who had just lost everything." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "I never asked you to fix anything," she said quietly. "I just needed you to stay." Marcus swallowed. "I know, and I failed." Another pause. Then he pulled a small paper bag from behind his back. "Chocolate croissants. From that bakery you used to love." I remembered. She looked at the bag. She could still recall the last time they had shared that exact pastry, her hands shaking. Her heart cracked wide open after. She closed her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "but you do not need to bring me memories. I have enough." He nodded. "I will go." She looked up at him, meeting his gaze, and she said, "Goodbye, Marcus." This time, it was her choice, and he left without argument. That night, Julian sensed something the moment he walked into their shared apartment. Arya was sitting on the floor, back against the couch, music playing low. Evelyn was asleep. The lights were dim. Julian crossed the room silently and sat beside her. She leaned her head onto his shoulder. "I saw someone today," she said. "He did not ask who." She continued, "Someone who was there the night I lost my brother." Julian froze. His arm tightened around her. "I never told you," she whispered. "You do not have to," he replied. "But I want to." And for the first time, she told the story. "He was 11, Arya began, her voice steady at first. "His name was Theo." Julian sat beside her on the living room floor, the soft flicker of the candle on the coffee table casting shadows across their faces. "We used to build forts in the hallway," she said, "with blankets and chair legs. He liked to pretend we were astronauts, or explorers, or time travelers. He always made me the captain." Julian did not speak. He simply listened. Arya stared ahead, eyes unfocused. "Our parents were always working 2 jobs each, night shifts. It was just us most evenings. One day, after school, we went to the bodega down the street. He wanted a popsicle. I told him to wait outside because I didn't want him crossing the street alone." She paused. Julian could feel the weight of memory beginning to crush her chest. "I was only in there for 2 minutes, maybe less, but when I came out, he was gone." Her voice cracked. There was a crowd. Sirens. A delivery truck had come down the hill too fast. He stepped off the curb. Julian reached for her hand. "He died on impact," Arya whispered. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I remember dropping the popsicle I bought for him. It melted all over the pavement. I remember thinking, if I had let him come with me, if I had just held his hand, if I had said wait here a little louder." She turned to Julian, her eyes wet and distant. "For years, I believed it was my fault, that I killed my little brother." Julian took her hand in both of his. "You were a child, Arya. I was his sister. You were 11. Her shoulders shook. but she did not cry out loud. The grief came like waves beneath her skin. No one ever talks about what it means to carry something like that. How it changes you. How every time something good happens, part of you wonders if you deserve it. Julian leaned in, pressing his forehead gently to hers. You do, he whispered. You deserve joy. You deserve peace. You deserve to be whole. I don't feel whole, she murmured. But you are, he said, because you remember him, because you carry him forward not as guilt, but as love. She wept then quietly, finally against his chest. The next morning, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and orange peel. Evelyn sat at the table in her robe, knitting, her eyes sharp despite the early hour. Arya poured her a cup of tea and sat across from her. The silence between them filled with shared understanding. I told him, Arya said softly. Evelyn looked up. About Theo. Her grandmother nodded slowly. And how do you feel? Exhausted. And a little lighter. That is grief, me Amber. Like an old coat you keep wearing long after the cold has passed. Arya smiled sadly. Did you ever lose someone? She asked. Evelyn's needles paused. My sister, she said. Lucia. She died during childbirth. I was 15, and I hated the world for not saving her. Arya blinked. I never knew that. Evelyn shrugged. We do not always speak of the deepest things. Sometimes because they hurt. Sometimes because we fear what they will change. But silence does not protect us. No, Evelyn said gently. It only isolates us. They sat in silence, sipping tea. Then Evelyn said, You are stronger than you think. Arya reached across the table and placed her hand on her grandmother's. I had a good teacher. That evening, Arya stood outside the new cafe. The sky above Brooklyn was painted in lavender and gold. The air smelled like early summer cut grass, distant lilacs, warm pavement. She closed her eyes, breathing in. Behind her, Julian stepped up and wrapped his arms round her waist. How are you? He asked. She turned to face him, hands resting on his chest. I am okay, she said honestly. Not perfect, but okay. Good. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a silver pendant, shaped like a paper star. For Theo, Julian said. Arya stared at it, eyes shining. He is still with you, Julian added. Now he gets to come with us too. She leaned into his chest, holding the star tightly, and for the first time in years, the weight in her chest felt bearable. The next few weeks unfolded like a soft healing song. Each morning before opening the new cafe, Arya would arrive early, long before the staff. She would set the chair straight, turn on the music, wipe the counters, and then she would take out her journal, and she would write letters to Theo. Hey little astronaut, I made a new batch of muffins today. You would have hated them. Too many cranberries. But the customers loved them. There's a little boy who comes in with his dad every Tuesday who reminds me of you. I still miss you. I think I always will. But I am learning how to miss you without falling apart. That is new. That is progress. Each letter was a way of speaking what had never been spoken. Julian never asked to read them. But one morning, Arya left one open on the kitchen table by accident. When she returned from the shower, she saw him there reading. She froze. But he looked up, smiled, and said, It is beautiful. And then, instead of closing it, he reached for a fresh page and wrote, Dear Theo, thank you for loving your sister. Because of you, she became the kind of woman who carries others even when her arms are shaking. I hope you know how proud I am to walk beside her. Arya pressed her hand to her chest. She did not cry. She simply nodded. And that was enough. A week later, Marcus returned. But this time, he did not ask to see Arya. He asked to see Evelyn. They met on the back patio of the original Evelyn's table, where potted herbs and morning glories climbed the fence. Evelyn sat with her tea, legs crossed, calm as always. Marcus stood nervously in front of her. I wanted to apologize, he said. For what? For the way I left, and for what happened before that. Evelyn looked up from her cup. I blamed you, you know, he continued, for not stopping her, for not warning her parents, for not doing more. He did not say her name, but they both knew he meant Arya's mother. Evelyn said nothing for a long time. Then she gestured to the sea across from her. Marcus sat. I blamed myself too, Evelyn said, for not seeing the signs sooner, for not calling the police, for staying silent when I should have screamed. Her voice trembled, but only slightly. But silence does not fix pain, she said. It only buries it. Marcus nodded. I am sorry. I know, Evelyn said. He looked surprised. I forgave you a long time ago, she added. But you had to ask for it. That was the part I could not do for you. That night, Julian cooked dinner. Arya sat at the kitchen counter, watching him move between pots and spices like it was a language only his hands spoke fluently. He made a crispy, rich, and comforting. When they sat down to eat, Julian reached across the table and said, Can I tell you something I have never told anyone? Arya blinked. Of course. He took a deep breath. When I was 9, my mother left. Arya set down her spoon. She just walked out one day. No goodbye, no note, just gone. Arya waited. My father told us she went on a trip. But days became weeks. Weeks became months. Eventually, Nathaniel found a postcard in the mail, no return address. Just a picture of a beach. And the words, I needed to go where it was quiet. His voice cracked. I kept that card under my pillow for 3 years. Every night, I would press it to my face and try to smell her perfume on it, as if love could live in ink. Arya reached for his hand. I thought if I worked hard enough, became important enough, she would come back, that she would see my name somewhere and remember me. Julian looked down. I built empires out of silence, but I never filled that hole. Arya squeezed his hand. You do not have to fill it, she said. You just have to stop bleeding. And for the first time, Julian let her see the boy beneath the billionaire. It began with a simple idea, a single flyer taped to the cafe door. Letters for the lost, a day of remembrance. Saturday, 10 a.m. to sunset. Bring a memory, write a letter, light a candle. Arya expected a handful of people. Instead, they came in waves. Elderly widows, quiet teenagers, middle-aged men with calloused hands, mothers holding photographs, children holding nothing but the weight of a name. Julian had rented a white canvas tent and set it up in the back courtyard. Inside were long tables, blank cards, pens, candles, and soft music. The scent of rosemary and baked apples drifted in from the kitchen. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was sacred. People wrote in silence. Some whispered their letters aloud. Some folded them into origami. Some burned them gently in the fireball near the fountain. Arya moved through the space without speaking. She lit candles for strangers and hugged a woman who wept over a note that said only, I miss the way you laughed. Julian stood at the coffee station, handing out free drinks with a soft smile. He never once left her side for long. That afternoon, Arya found a letter tucked inside the donation box. It had no name, no envelope, just a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. She opened it. To the sister who held my hand on the last day. You told me you would be back in 2 minutes. And you were. But 2 minutes is long when you are 11, and the world moves faster than it should. I saw your face when you came running, and I want you to know we never blamed you. I felt safe every day of my life because of you, even the last one. Let me go now, not because you forgot, but because you finally remember who you are without the weight. You are the captain. Remember, always. Love, T. Arya's knees buckled. Julian caught her. She handed him the letter, her fingers trembling. I did not write that, she whispered. Julian read it, his expression softening. I know. Then who? But there was no one to ask, no one to chase, only the note, and the warmth that brought with it. A strange, impossible warmth, like a touch on the shoulder from someone long gone. That night, as the candles flickered low and the stars blinked awake overhead, Arya and Julian sat beneath the trellis in the courtyard, arms wrapped around each other. They watched the last guests depart, one by one. I think we should do this every year, Arya said. Julian nodded. Not because it fixes anything, she added. But because it reminds us that we are not alone in our remembering. Julian turned to face her. I made a decision today. She tilted her head. Yes, I am not opening a third location. She blinked. Really, I was going to, he said. I had meetings lined up, investors waiting, but today I saw something that mattered more than expansion. She leaned in. I saw you. Arya smiled, touched. Julian continued. And I saw them. All of them. These people who come not just for coffee or food, but for comfort, for meaning, for a space to breathe. He took her hand. I do not want to turn that into a brand. I want to protect it. Arya kissed his knuckles. I think that is the bravest business decision you have ever made. Julian laughed. They sat in silence, watching the candlelight dance. Later, before bed, Arya placed the mysterious letter in her journal beside the ones she had written to Theo. She did not know who had left it. She did not know how they knew. Maybe it had been a coincidence, or maybe just maybe some things in this world defied reason, because they were stitched together by love instead. Whatever the truth, she felt lighter, whole, even, and for the first time in years, when she closed her eyes, she did not see the moment Theo died. She saw his smile. She saw his hand in hers. And she saw herself letting go of him. But of the blame. The summer began gently. Soft breezes moved through the lace curtains in Evelyn's apartment. Lavender bloomed in the flower boxes. Children ran barefoot down the sidewalks of Queens, chasing melting popsicles and clouds shaped like dragons. Inside Evelyn's to believe original Kafeth walls held stories. Not just of customers and menus and memories, but of generations. You could feel it in the way the wood creaked when you walked, in the fingerprints worn into the counter, in the faded photograph of Evelyn and her late husband tucked behind the register. Arya walked through it every morning like stepping through the pages of a book that only she and Evelyn could read. But even stories fade if you stop reading them. It started with a forgotten key, then an overboiled kettle, then a name left hanging at the edge of a sentence, swallowed by confusion. Meet Amber, Evelyn said one morning, blinking at Arya. Did I feed the cats yet? Arya smiled softly. We do not have cats, Abweller. Oh, Evelyn blinked again, then laughed. Silly me. They both smiled, but only one of them felt the chill beneath it. By mid-July, the gaps in memory grew wider. Sometimes Evelyn would leave the stove on. Sometimes she would call Arya by her mother's name. Sometimes she would forget that Arya had already told her something just 10 minutes earlier. At first, Arya told herself it was just age. Then she told herself it was stress. Finally, she stopped telling herself anything. One afternoon, she sat beside Julian on the couch, her head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. I think something is happening to her, she whispered. Julian did not ask who. She gets lost in her own apartment sometimes. She forgets the way to the pantry. She forgets names. Julian rubbed her back gently. Have you spoken to her doctor? I tried. She insisted she was fine. Said her mind just had too many books stacked inside it. And sometimes they fall over. Julian smiled sadly. That sounds like her. I am scared, Arya admitted. Julian tightened his arms around her. I am here. I know. But what if I cannot do anything to stop it? Then we walk with her through it. Every step. She nodded, tears silent in her eyes. A week later, Julian planned the proposal. It was simple, quiet, just as Arya would want it. He had booked the cafe after hours, lit the space with hundreds of tiny candles, and placed Evelyn's handwritten recipes at each table like silent witnesses. A single string quartet would play her favorite Pisacler de Lune. The ring was simple, a sapphire set in a band of brushed gold. It reminded him of her eyes. He told no one except Evelyn, or at least, he tried to. When he arrived to tell her that morning, she opened the door with a confused smile. Julian, what a nice surprise. Is Arya with you? No, just me. May I come in? Of course. Would you like some tea? She put the kettle on, then turned to him. I am so glad you're marrying Arya. He blinked. How did you? You told me last week. Did you not? Julian hesitated. No, I was coming to tell you today. Evelyn paused, confusion flickering behind her eyes. Oh, she whispered. Then maybe I dreamed it. He reached across the table, placed his hand over hers. It is okay. No, she said softly. It is not. And that was when she began to cry. The proposal never happened that night, because an envelope arrived instead, white, plain, stamped with the seal of the Queen's Municipal Redevelopment Office. Aria found it in the mail tray at the cafe. She opened it with hands still sticky from pastry glaze. The words inside changed everything. The letter was not cruel. It was clinical, polite, even. To the leaseholder of 87 Parkside Avenue, we are writing to inform you that your current tenancy agreement will be subject to review as part of the Parkside Redevelopment Initiative, approved under Municipal Code 4.16b. Due to zoning changes, the property on which your establishment sits has been earmarked for acquisition and redevelopment into a multi-use commercial and residential complex. We appreciate your cooperation and will be providing transitional compensation. Please contact the undersigned within 14 business days to discuss vacating terms. There were no apologies, no acknowledgements, no mention of how many lives had passed through that little cafe, no mention of the baby who had taken her first steps between its tables, of the marriage proposals, of the wakes, of the handwritten notes and napkin corners. Just a deadline. Aria stood in the kitchen, the letter trembling in her fingers. Julian entered from the storeroom with a crate of coffee beans. One look at her face, and he froze. What is it? She handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then again, then again. By the time he looked up, her eyes were red. They are going to tear it down. Julian, she whispered. They are going to destroy it. He reached for her, but she stepped back. I cannot let them do this. We will fight it. She stared at him. Will we? Yes. And if we cannot stop them, he paused, then we do what we can to preserve what matters. Aria laughed bitterly. That place is not just a business, Julian. It is our story. It is Evelyn's legacy. It is Theo's memory. It is every single thing I ever loved. Julian stepped forward and placed his hands on her shoulders. I know. Then how are you so calm? Because I cannot afford not to be, he said gently. Because if I panic, you will not have anyone to lean on. She broke then into sobs that she had held in for too long. They consulted lawyers, community board members, historians. Everyone said the same thing. Unless the building was landmarked, it was not. And unless they could prove significant historical relevance, not just emotional relevance, there was no legal basis to stop the acquisition. Julian hired a media firm to tell their story. Local newspapers ran headlines like, "Millionaire fights to save beloved neighborhood cafe." Evelyn's table, more than just a place to eat. A community's heart is on the line. They received support, petitions, letters, protests, but the city had already signed the papers. The machine was in motion, and the machine did not stop for grief. One evening, Aria returned to the apartment late. Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album. Do you remember this? She asked, pointing to a photograph of Aria at age 7, frosting smeared across her cheeks. Aria nodded, too tired to smile. Evelyn traced the edge of the photo with her finger. You always wanted to feed everyone, she said, even as a little girl. Aria sat beside her. Abuela, they are going to tear it down. I know. You do. Evelyn nodded. They came by earlier, left a pamphlet on urban revitalization. I told the young man I would rather have my wrinkles than a new face. Aria laughed despite herself. What do I do? She whispered. Evelyn looked at her for a long time, then said, You listen. To what? To what stays when everything else leaves? Aria frowned. Places change, Evelyn said. Buildings fall, but the thing we built it is not made of bricks. It is made of stories, of love, of memory. She placed her hand on Aria's. Do not fight for the shell. Fight for the soul. Aria blinked. How do I do that? You already are, Evelyn said softly. Just do not forget that the cafe was never the dream. You were. They called it the last table. It was not a protest. Not officially. It was a celebration, a goodbye, a memory etched in flower and fire and family. Aria designed the event herself. She invited everyone. Past customers, neighbors, musicians, artists, old friends, and especially those who had ever written a memory on the cafe's wall. They opened the doors at sunrise. Instead of menus, they handed out blank paper and pens. Write a story, share a dish, light a candle. The walls were already covered with decades of handwritten thoughts, phrases like, I met my husband here in 1992. This coffee saved my finals week. She told me yes over blueberry pie. My father's wake was here. And I never felt so surrounded by warmth. By noon, the line stretched around the block. Julian worked the back kitchen like he was conducting an orchestra. Aria stood at the front counter with Evelyn Woe insisted on wearing her original apron, now faded but dignified. At one point, Evelyn forgot what she was doing mid-order. Aria stepped in quickly, covering with a smile. But Evelyn caught her wrist and whispered, Do not protect me from myself. I want to be here, even if I am forgetting. So Aria let go and let her grandmother be, not who she was, but who she still chose to be. In the middle of the afternoon, Julian called Aria to the back room. I have something to show you. She followed him past the pantry, through the storeroom, and into the narrow hallway where they used to hang staff photos. There, pinned along the entire wall, were envelopes, hundreds of them, some decorated, some plain, some with wax seals. Aria turned slowly. What is this? Julian handed her one. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Evelyn's table, you fed me when I had nothing and no one. You told me I mattered, even when I barely believed I existed. You let me sit for hours without buying anything but a coffee, and you never made me feel less. You gave me more than soup. You gave me sanctuary. Aria covered her mouth with her hand. These came in over the past 2 weeks, Julian said. After the paper ran the article, some were dropped off, some mailed in, some emailed, so I printed them. She walked slowly down the hallway, reading. Dozens, hundreds, each a tribute, each a love letter, to a place, to a moment, to a version of themselves that had been allowed to rest here, and breathe, and be seen. At the end of the hallway, Julian turned to her. I was going to propose the night the letter came, he said. Aria's heart tightened. I had the candles, the string quartet, the ring. She looked into his eyes. I am sorry it did not happen. Julian shook his head. It did. It just looked different. He reached into his pocket and handed her a stack of envelopes. I saved these. They all have your name on them. Aria opened the first one. Dear Aria, you taught me to stand up for myself and how to stir soup properly. You made me believe my voice mattered. I named my daughter after you. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. Julian took her hand. You do not need a ring to know that I am already yours, he said. But if you still want one, I do have something. He pulled out a ring at the sapphire one she had once seen, but a band made from cafe wood, encased in glass, with a tiny inscription inside. What we make matters. Aria stared at it, heart trembling. He did not kneel. He did not ask. He simply waited, and she reached for the ring, and slipped it on, and said yes. That evening, as the sun sank below the city skyline, Aria found Evelyn on the back steps, watching the last guest leave. She sat beside her. Evelyn leaned her head against Aria's shoulder. I remember less now, she said softly, but I still remember the feeling. What feeling? Evelyn looked up. Of knowing I did something that mattered, that I made something good. Aria squeezed her hand. You did. You still do. Evelyn smiled, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an envelope. For you. Aria opened it carefully. It was a letter handwritten in Evelyn's delicate cursive. Me, Aria, if you are reading this, I am still here, but not all of me. So I wanted to write to the version of you who is holding more than she should. Let go. Not of me, not of the cafe, but of the guilt, the weight, the belief that everything must be preserved exactly as it was to be honored. Love does not live in walls. It lives in the people who carry it forward. Build something new, and let the old bless it, not bind it. And remember, you are the table now. I love you. Ob Weller. The last night came softly. No grand farewell. No banners. No speeches. Just quiet, and light, and music. Ari arrived early, before dawn, and unlocked the door to Evelyn's table one final time. She stood there alone in the stillness, breathing in the scent of coffee grounds and old wood and lavender soap. Julian arrived next, carrying thermoses of hot cider and boxes of candles. They lit the place slowly, one candle at a time. No electricity, only flame. At sunrise, neighbors began to appear. Some brought baked goods, others brought instruments. A few simply came to sit at their usual tables, in silence, as if listening for echoes. Evelyn arrived just before noon. She wore her best sweater. Julian had carved a seat for her in the sunniest corner, beside the ivy-covered window. Aria wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and kissed her forehead. "Are you sure you are up for this?" she whispered. Evelyn nodded. "If I forget it tomorrow, promise you will remember it for me." "I will." The hours passed like pages turning. People read aloud their memories. A string trio played Claire de Lune. Children drew chalk hearts on the sidewalk outside. Julian served soup with a ladle that once belonged to Evelyn's husband. Arya stood behind the counter, just watching. Every tear, every laugh, every goodbye. And when twilight came, they handed out slips of pepperoni final message per person. The instructions were simple. Write what this place meant to you, then light your candle, place your message inside, and let it go. They filled the tables with floating lanterns. At 8 p.m., Evelyn lit the first flame. Julian followed, then Arya. One by one, they stepped outside to the courtyard, where the small fountain had been converted into a glowing pool. The first lantern floated gently across the water, then the second, then hundreds, all holding tiny notes, all glowing, all drifting, like memories, like blessings, like goodbyes that did not mean lastingly movement. That night, Arya tucked Evelyn into the guest room at their apartment. Evelyn looked around, smiling at the soft bedding and wall of family photos Julian had hung earlier that week. "It smells like cinnamon," she said sleepily. "That is the cookies baking," Arya replied. "Are you happy, me Amber?" Arya sat beside her. "I think I am learning how to be." Evelyn reached for her hand. "You know, I think that is what life really is. Not being happy, but learning how to be." They sat in silence. Then Evelyn whispered, "Promise me you will not stop feeding people, even if it is nut soup." "I promise." And Evelyn smiled and drifted off to sleep. 2 weeks later, the demolition began. Arya did not go. Julian did. He took photos. He saved the sign. He brought back the counter bell. He told her the wolves had come down slowly, carefully, and when it was all gone, he placed his hand on the empty lot and whispered, "Thank you." Spring came early that year. The trees bloomed before the calendar told them to. The sun warmed the sidewalks like it had something to prove. Arya opened a new cafe. She called it Theo's Light. Not Evelyn's Table 2.0, not a replica, a continuation. Bright walls, long communal tables, shelves of donated books, a community kitchen that served one free meal a day to anyone who asked. In the corner sat a framed letter from Evelyn. Next to it, the carved counter bell from the original cafe. When the first customer stepped inside, Arya stood behind the counter wearing her own apron, stitched with one word in gold and thread: "Begin." The morning sunlight spilled through the gauzy curtains of the apartment like liquid gold. Outside, the soft rhythm of city life drifted upward, distant whir of delivery bicycles, the hum of early buses, the occasional bark of a dog greeting the day. Inside, everything was still. Arya awoke slowly, her eyes fluttering open to a ceiling she now knew like the back of her hand. A fan spun lazily above her. A gentle warmth radiated from the body beside her. Julian's arm was draped across her waist, protective even in sleep. His breath was steady, calm. She smiled, reaching over to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. He did not stir. She stayed there for a long while, memorizing the lines of his face in the morning light, the faint crease between his brows, the way his lips parted just slightly, the warmth that radiated from him like he carried the sun under his skin. This was peace, and she had almost forgotten what it felt like. The apartment smelled of coffee and toasted cinnamon. Evelyn was already awake, sitting on the small terrace outside the kitchen, wrapped in a shawl and sipping tea from her favorite mug, one that said "World's Most Stubborn Matriarch" in chip gold letters. Julian had made breakfast: scrambled eggs, avocado toast, and a side of fresh fruit arranged with surprising artistry. When Arya raised her eyebrows, he shrugged. "I have hidden talents," he said, placing a small flower in her orange juice glass. "You are lucky you were handsome," she teased, leaning in for a kiss. Evelyn watched them from her spot, eyes soft. "You two are like a painting," she said. "A quiet one, nothing dramatic, just right." Arya smiled at her grandmother, but behind her smile was a flicker of sorrow. Evelyn had called her by the wrong name twice that morning, but she had remembered this moment, and that was enough for now. Later that afternoon, Arya found herself called into Theo's light under the pretense of a surprise delivery. Julian had insisted she wear something comfortable, but elegant. When she arrived, she was stunned. The entire cafe had been transformed. Soft lanterns hung from the ceiling like stars. The tables were pushed to the sides, replaced by rows of white folding chairs facing the large bay window. Potted lavender lined the aisle. The kitchen counter had been converted into a small altar, adorned with wildflowers and family photos. In the back, Evelyn stood in a pale blue dress, her silver hair brushed smooth, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "What is this?" Arya turned in place, heart fluttering. Julian stepped out from the kitchen, wearing a crisp linen shirt and dark slacks. No tie, no jacket, just the man she loved, smiling like her presence was the only decoration that mattered. "It is a wedding," he said simply. "Our wedding." She stared at him. "But we said next year, after everything settles." After, Julian walked to her, took her hands in his. "I realized something," he said softly. "There is never a perfect time to begin a forever. So why not start now?" Arya's lips trembled. "You plan all this?" Evelyn helped. "A lot. Although she did try to convince me to serve tamales. I still think tamales would have been excellent," Evelyn interjected from behind them. Arya laughed, her voice catching in her throat. "But my dress mishusi have not even told anyone." Julian kissed her hand. "All you need is yes." Arya looked round, at the lavender, at the candles, at the photos of her mother and father, of Theo, of Evelyn when she was younger, standing behind the counter of a smaller cafe with the same fire in her eyes. She looked at Julian, and the word was easy. "Yes." Evelyn walked her down the aisle. Her steps were slow, but steady. She held Arya's hand like it was made of glass and gold. With each step, the cafe's walls seemed to breathe around them, as if the very place was watching, remembering, blessing. Julian waited with tears in his eyes. No efficient, no pump, just the three of them and the hundreds of memories that filled the air like perfume. "I have no prepared speech," Julian began, voice cracking. "But I have a promise." Arya reached for his hands, grounding them both. "I promise to build a life where you never have to hide who you are. I promise to listen when it is hard, to love when it is easy, to hold you when the world forgets how. I promise that every morning, I will choose you again, and again, and again." Arya inhaled deeply. "I promise to remember for both of us when memories fade. I promise to carry what you love as if it is mine. I promise to open the doors of my life so you always have a home. I promise to honor the quiet parts of you, and I promise to fight for the loud ones." They exchanged rings to simple bands engraved with the word light on the inside. Julian slipped hers on. Arya kissed his hand, and Evelyn whispered, "You may now dance, my darlings." That night, The city slept as if cradled by stars. Arya lay beside Julian on the old pull-out couch in their small living room. They had chosen not to leave for any elaborate honeymoon. Instead, they curled up beside each other under a blanket they had chosen together at a thrift store last winter, drinking tea out of mismatched mugs, while soft jazz floated from the radio. A candle flickered on the windowsill, casting warm shadows across their faces. Evelyn had fallen asleep hours earlier after dancing due to full songs at the wedding. She had insisted on baking the cake herself in almond vanilla sponge topped with lemon glaze and edible petals. It had tilted slightly to one side, but no one cared. Arya had never tasted anything so perfect. Julian traced lazy circles along Arya's shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "Do you feel different?" She tilted her head back to look at him. "No," she said thoughtfully, "but also, yes." He smiled. Same. They did not need champagne or a beachfront villa. They had this, a quiet place to belong. The next morning, while Julian cooked breakfast and Evelyn sat on the terrace thumbing through an old photo album, Arya checked the mailbox in the lobby. Among the usual bills and coupons, one envelope stood out. It was old-fashioned cream-colored with delicate blue edging, addressed in elegant handwriting. Miss Arya Solan A. Sinclair, Theo's Light Cafe, Queens. For her eyes only, her pulse quickened. She turned it over. There was no return address. Inside was a single letter, folded carefully. She unfolded it with trembling hands. "My dearest Arya, I do not know if you will read this, or if you will ever wish to hear from me. I would understand if you tore this apart the moment you saw my name. I deserve that, and more. But if, by some miracle, you choose to read on, please let me say what I should have said years ago. I am your father. I was a coward. When your mother died, I lost more than my wife. I lost my compass, my sense of direction. I should have been there for you. I should have fought through my own grief to hold you through yours. Instead, I let guilt turn into absence. I let shame bury me, and I let your grandmother do the job I was too broken to face. Evelyn raised you with strength I never possessed. She gave you the roots I never offered. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I would give anything to hear your voice again, even if only to tell me to stay away. I live quietly now in Vermont. I run a small used bookstore. It is not much, but it is peaceful. I thought of writing to you every year. I never did. I thought I had time. Then I saw your wedding notice in the paper. Evelyn must have submitted it to the local page, and there you were grown, radiant, strong. You looked so much like your mother that I had to sit down. If you wish to write back or come find me, I would be grateful beyond measure. If not, I will carry the egg quietly, as I always have. With love, always. Your father, Gabriel Sinclair. Arya read the letter 3 times. The words blurred at the edges. She did not cry, not yet. Instead, she folded the paper carefully, placed it back in its envelope, and tucked it into the side of her bag. She did not tell Julian, not immediately. She did not tell Evelyn either. Instead, she walked back into the cafe and brewed herself a strong cup of black coffee. And then she stared out the window for a very long time. That afternoon, she stood before the mirror in the back office, still holding the letter in her hand. She stared at her reflection, searching for something, some feature, some angle that might have come from him. The curve of her jaw, her long fingers, the faint shadow beneath her eyes. She remembered being 7 years old, asking Evelyn where her father was. "He left," her grandmother had said, "but not because of you." She had not asked again, but now the question returned, wrapped in cursive ink and regret. Why now? Why after all these years? Why after she had finally built a life that felt whole? And what did he want from her? That night, Arya told Julian everything. They sat on the fire escape, sharing a blanket, watching the moonlight shimmer across the rooftops. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, she waited. "What do you feel?" he asked. "I do not know," she admitted. "Anger, confusion, a strange kind of hope, which scares me." Julian nodded slowly. "I think," he said, that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are also the ones we most wish would come back just on Seto say they were sorry. She looked down at the letter in her hands. I do not know if I can forgive him. You do not have to, Julian said gently. Not today. Not ever, if you choose not to. But if you want to know him just to know, then maybe you should. Arya leaned her head against his shoulder. I do not want to be disappointed again. I will be here if you are. The paper sat blank for a long time. Arya stared at it, pen in hand, trying to write anything. Words churned in her chest, but refused to settle on the page. She had never been good at speaking from anger, but now she realized she was even worse at speaking from wounds. What do you say to the man who disappeared when you were a child? What do you say to the one person who was supposed to love you unconditionally and didn't? At last, she began. Slowly, Gabriel, I do not know if I can call you father yet. Maybe someday, maybe never. But I am writing back because I believe people deserve the chance to be seen, even if only once. Your absence shaped my life. Your silence taught me the sound of longing. I grew up wondering why I was not enough to keep you, but I also grew up surrounded by love. Evelyn gave me more than you ever did, and though I am still learning how to let go of what never was, I have learned that pain can grow alongside beauty. They do not cancel each other out. You said you live quietly now. I suppose that is what happens when grief steals your voice for too long. But I am not writing to reopen wounds. I am writing because I want to see your eyes once, to know if they look like mine, to ask you questions you may not have answers to, and maybe, if we are both brave enough, to say goodbye to silence. I will be in Vermont next weekend. If you are willing, you may meet me at the corner table of Linden Bookstore on Saturday at 3 p.m. If not, I will understand. Sincerely, Arya Solan A. Sinclair. She folded the letter with hands that shook, but not from fear, from readiness. 2 days before they left for Vermont, Arya sat on the edge of Evelyn's bed with a cup of chamomile tea. Evelyn was staring out the window, her expression distant but calm. Did you ever think he would come back? Arya asked quietly. Evelyn blinked slowly, then turned to look at her. Her gaze was sharp, clear in a way Arya had not seen in weeks. I hoped, Evelyn whispered. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time you asked if your father would ever call, I told myself, maybe this year. Why did you never tell me what happened? Because I thought protecting you from his cowardice would spare you the hurt. But maybe I was wrong. Arya nodded. Silence settled. Then Evelyn's voice, almost soft to hear. He used to read poetry out loud. Did you know that? Arya looked up, surprised. He kept a little leather notebook with him all the time. Used to write little verses in it. Some of them were for your mother. Arya blinked back tears. I do not remember that. You were so little. But I remember the last one he ever wrote. He left it on the table before he left. Evelyn closed her eyes, reciting from memory. I am not leaving because I stopped loving. I am leaving because I love to broken. And I cannot teach a daughter to trust a father who cannot trust himself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Arya reached over and wrapped her arms round Evelyn's shoulders. He hurt you too. He hurt all of us, Evelyn said. But I think, deep down, I never hated him. I just hated what fear did to him. They left for Vermont on a cloudy Friday morning. Julian drove, one hand on the wheel, the other often resting on Arya's knee, grounding her when she got to quiet. The highway stretched out like a ribbon through mountains beginning to shed their winter coats. Bare trees reached toward the sky, still waiting for spring to begin. Arya stared out the window, clutching the sealed envelope in her lap. Her wedding ring caught the light, subtle, steady, constant. Are you sure you want me there? Julian asked softly. She looked at him. Yes. He nodded. No matter what happens, he said, you walk out of that bookstore with your head high. You hear me? She smiled faintly. I hear you. That night they stayed at a small bed and breakfast just outside of town. The walls were painted lavender, and the air smelled of honey and pine. They ate dinner by the fireplace, sharing a bowl of butternut squash soup, and reading local newspapers out loud to each other to ease the tension. Julian made her laugh in purpose again and again. "You are doing that thing," she said. Eyes narrowed. "What thing?" "Trying to distract me with humor. It is working, is it not?" She rolled her eyes, but the knot in her chest loosened. Saturday arrived with unexpected sunlight. At 2:45 p.m., Arya stood outside the Linden bookstore, clutching her letter like it might evaporate. Julian gave her a long, steady kiss on the forehead. "I will wait in the car, right outside. Always." She walked inside. The store was quiet, cozy. Old floorboards, tall shelves, dust motes dancing in the light. A faint smell of leather and citrus. She made her way to the corner table. At 3 p.m. exactly, a man entered through the front door. He was older than she expected. His hair was completely gray, tied back in a soft ponytail. His hands trembled slightly as he scanned the store. When his eyes met hers, time seemed to hesitate. There was recognition. There was fear. There was something else like light caught in a long-forgotten mirror. He stepped closer. "Arya." She nodded. "Gabriel." Gabriel sat down across from her with the cautious reverence of a man who was not sure if he was allowed to breathe. His hands rested on the table, folded tightly. He was thinner than she imagined. Lines etched across his face told the story of years not spent laughing. His clothes were plain a dark green sweater, jeans faded at the knees, old brown boots. But it was his eyes that struck her most. They were the same shade as hers, green, but quiet. The kind of quiet that came from having carried too much for too long. "I did not think you would come," he said. "I did not think you would write," Arya replied. A beat passed. Gabriel nodded slowly. "I suppose that makes us even." Arya reached into her bag and pulled out the letter. "I read it 3 times. I wrote it 30, he said, managing a weak smile. "Before I ever sent it." She did not smile back. There was no cruelty in her gaze, but there was no warmth either. "Why now?" He took a deep breath. "Because seeing your name in print felt like being handed a second chance from a life I thought I had buried." Arya said nothing. Gabriel's voice softened. "I know I have no right to ask anything, but thank you for this, for coming." She hesitated. "I am not here to give you peace. I am here because I needed to know if you were real, or just a ghost I kept chasing." He nodded. "I am real, and I have been a coward for far too long." They sat in silence for a few moments. Outside, wind stirred the chimes on the bookstore's porch. Inside, time stretched gently between them. Finally, Gabriel spoke. "You're another." She was the kind of woman who saw the beauty in everything, even in me. I do not know why she chose me, but she did. Arya's throat tightened. "You left after she died." "I did." "You did not come to the funeral." "I know." "You left me with Evelyn and never wrote, never called, never asked." "I know," he whispered again. Tears stung her eyes. "Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I can imagine," he said softly, voice cracking. "But I do not pretend to understand the full damage. Only you can." "Then why did you do it?" Her voice rose slightly. "Why did you leave a child behind?" Gabriel looked down at his hands. "I was drowning, Arya. Your mother was the light in my life. And when she died, I did not know how to breathe without her. And I thought strong light staying would poison you. That you deserve someone strong, not someone crumbling. You could have chosen both." "I know, and I didn't. I chose fear." They fell quiet again. Arya's hands trembled in her lap. "I have spent years imagining this moment," she said. "And in every version, I either screamed at you or walked away. And here you are, doing neither. I think I am tired of carrying anger." Gabriel blinked rapidly. She noticed the sheen in his eyes. "There is something I need to give you," he said. He reached into a worn leather satchel and pulled out a small notebook black, frayed at the edges, bound by a rubber band. He handed it to her. "I kept writing," he said. "Poems, thoughts, letters, some to your mother, some to you. I never mailed them. I did not know how." Arya opened the notebook. The first page was written in her father's careful script. to my daughter, in case I never find the courage to tell you in person. You were my second heartbeat." Her lips parted slightly. She flipped through pages filled with ink-smudged confessions and finished verses, apologies written in stanzas. He had remembered her birthdays. He had written about her first steps, even though he had missed them. He had written letters dated each year and May 10th her birthday. "I did not deserve to watch you grow," Gabriel said, "but I tried to hold on to the pieces I imagined, and I kept writing, hoping someday I would become the kind of man you might want to meet." Arya looked up. "You could have come back. I was afraid I had lost the right." For the first time in the conversation, Arya reached across the table. She placed her hand over his. "You lost a lot, but you are here now, and I think maybe we both needed this." He closed his eyes, visibly trembling under her touch. "Does this mean you forgive me?" She took a long breath. "No, but it means I am willing to start knowing you." Gabriel let out a sound that was part laugh, part sob. "That is more than I deserve." "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes grace is not about who deserves it." They talked for nearly 2 hours. About her childhood, about how Evelyn kept the cafe alive after Theo's passing, about Arya's love for books and cinnamon toast and jazz music on rainy mornings, about Julian. Gabriel listened like a man catching up on a lifetime in fast forward. When she told him about her wedding, he smiled. "I always thought you would grow into someone brave." "I did," she said, "but not alone." When she finally stood to leave, Gabriel walked her to the door. The sky outside was overcast again. The light was soft and forgiving. "Will you write?" he asked. "I might." He nodded. "I will not pressure you, but if someday you want to know more about your mother, or my side, I will be here." She nodded slowly. Then, after a beat, she leaned in and hugged him. It was brief, but real. And when she stepped back, Gabriel was crying openly. "Goodbye," she said gently. "Until next time," he replied. Julian stood outside by the car, hands in his pockets, waiting. When Arya emerged, he opened his arms without a word. She collapsed into them. No tears, just the sound of her exhaling and waited. "Well," he whispered, "I am okay." He kissed her forehead. "Do you want to go home?" She looked up at him. "No," she said softly. "Let's drive for a while." That evening, they found a hill overlooking a lake. They sat on the hood of the car, drinking tea from a thermos Evelyn had packed and watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Julian wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Arya held the notebook in her lap. "He is not perfect," she said. "None of us are, but he wrote me poems for 17 years. Julian smiled. "That is something." Arya looked at the horizon. "I think I needed to know that even if someone breaks you, they can still carry your name with love." Julian nodded. "And now," she leaned her head against him, "now I get to decide what kind of future we write together, without ghosts." He kissed the top of her head. "That sounds like a good beginning." And as the sky turned lavender, and the first stars blinked open above them, Arya closed her eyes and breathed in something she had not tasted in years. Peace. The cafe smelled of cinnamon, vanilla, and something else, hope. It had been exactly 6 months since Arya and Julian's wedding, and the once small cafe they had nurtured into life, Evelyn's table, had grown beyond what either of them imagined. The place was now packed daily with families, teachers, artists, and students drawn not just by the food, but by the warmth that lingered in every corner. There was laughter in the air. Music from a local jazz trio floated softly between tables, and on the wall behind the counter, Arya had framed the old black and white photo of Evelyn and Theo from their first calf right next to a chalkboard quote that changed weekly. Today's read, "Grow deep roots before reaching for the sky." Evelyn had chosen herself. She sat in her usual corner, a crocheted shawl draped over her shoulders, watching the rhythm of the cafe with quiet pride. Julian moved through the kitchen like a composer leading an orchestra. His hands never stopped flipping, seasoning, plating. He smiled often but spoke less. He had always believed in letting the food speak first. Aria stood at the center of the Alex sunlight. She wore a simple white apron and her hair in a loose braid. Her notebook was tucked into her back pocket. She stopped to greet regulars by name, refill a child's cocoa, and scribble menu revisions while checking inventorial in one fluid motion. But even in the glow of success, a quiet tension hummed beneath the surface. Something was about to change. That night, after closing, Julian found her in the pantry, organizing dry goods by expiry date. "Come outside," he said softly. "I want to show you something." Aria wiped her hands and followed him out the back door. The alley behind the cafe had been transformed into a small herb garden, something Julian had been quietly tending in his spare hours. He held a small silver envelope in his hands. "What's this?" He handed it to her. She opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation. "Congratulations. Chef Julian Rowe has been selected as a finalist for America's Rising Flame, a competitive culinary series for rising chefs. Filming begins in Los Angeles in 4 weeks. The winner receives a $100,000 grant and national recognition." Aria blinked. "You applied?" Julian shifted his weight. "Actually, Marcus did. You know, from the supplier warehouse. He filmed me making the carrot ginger soup one night and submitted it as a joke. But they loved it." She stared at him. Julian's voice was tentative. "I said no at first, but then I thought, maybe I owe it to myself, to us. If I win, we can open that community kitchen you've dreamed about. Teach kids, feed families." She nodded slowly. "But it's in LA. 8 weeks," he said. "Just eat. I'd fly back on the off days. Maybe even bring you out for the finale." Aria smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's incredible." Julian stepped forward, cupping her face. "Say what you're thinking." She hesitated. "I'm proud of you." "I am, but it's just, things are growing here too. We're expanding, Julian. I need you." His hands fell to his sides. "I'm trying to make something bigger for both of us." "I know, and I love that about you." She looked down. "But every time we grow, we get farther apart." Silence stretched between them. Julian finally spoke. "Do you want me to stay?" Aria didn't answer right away. "I don't want to be the reason you don't reach for something that excites you. But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of becoming roots while you become branches." Later that night, Evelyn called out to Aria as she walked past the hallway. "Come sit." Aria slid into the chair beside her grandmother's. The old woman studied her. "You look like someone trying to make room for joy and grief in the same breath." Aria smiled faintly. "That's oddly specific." "I know the feeling." She reached for Aria's hand. "I once watched Theo turn down a citywide baking competition because I had a cold. You know what I told him?" "What?" "I told him he was being ridiculous, that I would still be here when he came back. But he just said, the dream means nothing if you're not in it." Aria's throat tightened. "What would you say now?" Evelyn's eyes twinkled. "I'd say, let him chase it, but ask him to take your heart with him, wrapped in foil, tucked into his suitcase, like a secret ingredient." 2 days later, Aria stood with Julian on the train platform. He was heading to the production orientation in Los Angeles. They held hands, foreheads pressed together, eyes closed. "I'll miss you," she whispered. "I'll call every night, no matter what." He placed a soft kiss on her lips. "You are not just my home," he said. "You're my fire." As the train pulled away, Aria stood still, watching him disappear. Her heart stretched across the distance like a tightrope, and somewhere deep inside, she wondered, would they still be holding both ends when the rope began to fray? The second location of Evelyn's table had been a dream whispered into coffee mugs and late-night journal entries. Nestled on a corner lot in Brooklyn Heights, the new space had exposed brick walls, antique pendant lighting, and floor-to-ceiling windows that poured golden light over handmade oak tables. It was beautiful, but beautiful did not mean easy. Aria stood in the middle of the empty space on a rainy Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, anxiety buzzing just beneath her skin. Contractors moved in and out, shouting over power tools. Deliveries were delayed. Permits were late. The espresso machine was backordered. And most pressingly, Evelyn had collapsed the night before. It had started small. A stumble in the kitchen, a dropped ball, a slurred word that did not seem like her. But Arya knew her grandmother like the back of her hand, and when Evelyn suddenly gripped the edge of the counter and could not stand, the world had tilted. At the hospital, the diagnosis had come swiftly, a mild stroke, not devastating, but serious. Rest, therapy, observation, and time. Time Arya did not feel she had. She had held Evelyn's hand while the doctor explained everything, nodding through fog, squeezing back tears as the monitors beeped in gentle defiance of the panic crawling up her spine. Julian's face had appeared on FaceTime a few hours later. She had tried to keep her voice steady. "She's okay," Arya had said, "but she's tired, confused. I'm scared." His expression had been stricken, helpless. "Do you want me to come home?" She had paused for a long time, then shook her head. "No, you are in week 2. You worked so hard for this. Stay, I'll handle it." He had hesitated. "You sure?" "I'm not," she whispered, "but do it anyway." Now, standing in the half-finished restaurant, Arya felt the weight of everything pressing against her like a storm tide. Her phone buzzed. "Liam, project manager. Health inspector delayed. Needs to reschedule to Friday. Kitchen sink still not approved. Let me know what you want to do." She exhaled through her nose, typing quickly. "Arya, push Friday's dry run. Reorder double sink. I'll handle inspector paperwork." 5 minutes later, another buzz. "Nurse Martyr, Evelyn's nurse. Miss Sinclair, your grandmother refused lunch and is insisting on getting up without assistance. Can you speak with her?" Arya closed her eyes. She felt as though she were being pulled apart by invisible threads, each one urgent, each one screaming for attention. For a second, she wished Julian were here. Then, immediately, guilt crept in. She had told him to stay. This was what support looked like, believing in each other's paths. But belief did not ease the ache of absence. That evening, Arya returned to the Queen's apartment with takeout containers in one hand and exhaustion blanketing her like wet wool. Evelyn was propped up on the couch, wrapped in her favorite quilt, a faint trace of lipstick still on her lips. She looked smaller somehow, frailer, but her voice was sharp as ever. "You look like you fought a war. Construction. Close enough. Did you eat?" "No, but I brought dinner. I am not hungry. Please, humor me." They sat in silence for a while, picking at the lukewarm food. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "I hate feeling like furniture." Arya looked up. "What do you mean?" "Everyone moves around me, talks over me, makes decisions like I'm not still me. You had a stroke, Obweller. You need rest. I need purpose." She snapped. "Not just pills and soft foods." Arya softened. "You've always had purpose. You built this family, but I want to be part of building what comes next." Arya moved closer, taking her hand. "Then help me. From here, tell me what you see that I'm missing. Be my mirror." Evelyn blinked, tears welling. "That I can do." Later that night, Arya climbed into bed and pulled out her notebook. She had started writing nightly letters to Julian. Most of them she did not send, but it made her feel closer to him. "Dear Julian, the new cafe smells like sawdust and too much potential. I keep thinking about your rosemary biscuits. The Brooklyn location would love those. Evelyn yelled at me today, which is a good sign, actually. I think she's returning to herself, one complaint at a time. I miss you. I miss your steadiness, your stupid jokes, your shoulder when I forget how to be strong. But I'm okay. I promise. Just tired, really tired. Come home soon. Love." She stared at the words, then closed the notebook. Sleep did not come easy. The next morning, she arrived early at the new location, clutching coffee in one hand and blueprints in the other. Liam was waiting for her. "We have a problem." "What now?" He pointed to the floor of the walk-in refrigerator. "There's a leak. Plumbing issue. Could delay final approvals." Arya felt her throat tighten. "No, we're opening in 9 days." "I know, but fix it. Call whoever you have to call. I'll pay the overtime." Liam nodded, backing off. but the damage was done. Arya felt the panic clawing at her again, rising like water. She stepped outside and called Julian. Voicemail. She tried again. Still voicemail. She left a message, voice trembling. I know you're busy, and I'm not mad. Today is hard, and I need to hear your voice. That's all. Call me when you can. That night, Evelyn insisted on being wheeled out onto the fire escape, wrapped into blankets, a cup of mint tea in her hand. I need air, she said. Arya brought her notebook, sitting beside her, scribbling ideas, rewrites, logistics. Evelyn watched her for a long while. You remind me of your mother when you're like this. Arya smiled. She was calmer than me. She was fire, but quieter about it. They sat in silence. Then Evelyn whispered, You're doing it. Doing what? Carrying too much. Smiling through it. I don't know another way. Try letting someone else lift one end. Arya looked away. He's not here. Then tell him, even if your voice shakes. Julian called just after midnight. Arya had been half asleep on the couch, surrounded by blueprints and to-do lists. Her phone balanced precariously on her stomach. The screen lit up with his name, and for a moment, she considered ignoring it. But she answered, Hey. Her voice was soft, raw. Julian's face appeared, beaming through the glow of a brightly lit studio kitchen. He was still wearing his chef's coat, slightly flour-dusted, the corners of his mouth curved upward in satisfaction. Sorry it's late. We just finished filming the semifinals. I wanted to see you. She smiled instinctively, then faltered. You look happy. I think I nailed today's challenge. Goat cheese souffle and lavender cream brulee. Judges called it bold and emotional. That sounds like you. He hesitated. Are you okay? She paused too long. Evelyn had a rough day. She finally said, She's confusing my name with Mom's now. It's like she's slipping away in pieces. Julian's expression softened. Damn, Arya, I'm so sorry. I know, she said. You're doing your best. But even as she said it, her eyes burned. Because best felt like not enough anymore. Julian rubbed the back of his neck. Can I come home after this week, even just for a few days? No, she said too quickly. If you come back now, you might not go back. And I don't want you to resent me for that. I would never. But you might, she said, even if you never said it out loud. A long silence followed. I miss you, he finally whispered. I miss you too. But neither of them said I love you, not this time. The next day, Arya was prepping final press for the Brooklyn location's soft opening when her phone buzzed with a media alert. Julian wrote Charm's judges on America's Rising Flame. She tapped the link, scrolling through the short article. When asked about his long-term dreams, Rose smiled and said, I've always wanted to open a fine dining restaurant in a quiet coastal town. Something elegant, intimate, maybe something with my name on the door. Arya stared at the screen, pulse quickening. Her name was nowhere in the article. Their shared dream, Evelyn's table, the community cafe, the affordable meals, the heart of Queens, it wasn't even mentioned. Something inside her cracked. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she wrote, Julian, I read the article. I know it is just a snippet, maybe even an edited quote, but it hurt. I feel like we started something together, something rooted in people, in story, in home. And now, I'm not sure what we are anymore. Maybe we were always meant to be two branches growing in opposite directions. Or maybe we stopped watering the roots. I still believe in you. I just don't know if I still belong in your dream. Arya, she did not send it. She folded it into the back of her journal. 2 days later, Julian showed up at the Brooklyn location without warning. It was late afternoon, and Arya was giving final prep instructions to the kitchen staff when she turned around and saw him in the doorway backlit by sunlight, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Julian, he dropped the bag. I took the red eye. She blinked. But the competition. I lost the finale. A beat passed. You what? I froze on the last round, he said, stepping closer. My caramel burned. I forgot the garnish. It fell apart. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. I'm not, he said. Not anymore. She opened her mouth to respond, but he raised his hand gently. I watched that interview clip. I know what it looked like. I panicked. I was thinking about failure and trying to sound like I had a full-back plan, but I messed up. And worse, I forgot to speak your name. Our name. Arya looked down. I didn't know where I fit in that vision. You are the vision, he said. She shook her head. Julian, we've been apart so long we forgot how to talk. Every conversation lately feels like we're building a bridge with matchsticks. He stepped closer. Then let's stop building. Let's go back to the table. She frowned. What? He pointed to the open patio, where the staff break room had been converted into an outdoor courtyard. Come sit with me, just for 10 minutes. No planning, no fixing, no timeline. She hesitated, then followed. They sat across from each other on mismatched chairs beneath strands of fairy lights. The hum of prep faded behind the walls. Julian placed his hands on the table. I want to stay, he said, not just in Queens or Brooklyn, but here, with you, wherever you are. Arya's throat tightened. But what if we want different things now? Then we learn to want together. He took a breath. I want Evelyn's table to grow, but I also want you to sleepy hours. I want you to eat hot meals. I want you to have time to sketch ideas that are not always tied to menus and schedules. I want us to feel joy again, not just momentum. She leaned forward. I want that too, but I don't know how to find it. He reached across the table, taking her hand. Maybe we start by saying the hard things, like how scared I was when I realized I liked being away, that I liked the recognition. She inhaled sharply, and how I resented you for chasing it, even when I told you to. They both laughed small. Crux sounds bit real. I love you, he said. I love you too, she replied. But I need to learn how to love myself when you're not around. Julian nodded. Then I'll wait for you while you do. That weekend, they reopened Evelyn's Table Brooklyn with a quieter ceremony than planned. No photographers, no influencers, just neighbors, friends, and Evelyn seated in a warm corner with her shell and a cane, watching everything with a watery smile. Julian stood in the open kitchen. Arya floated from table to table, and for the first time in a long time, they felt not like two branches fighting the wine, but like roots intertwining again beneath the soil. Autumn crept into Queens like a whispered secret. The heat of summer fell away gently, replaced by crisp mornings and trees blushing in shades of amber and rust. The sidewalks around Evelyn's table crunched beneath boots and children's laughter, and the scent of nutmeg, cinnamon, and brown butter floated through the air like a lullaby. For the first time in what felt like years, Arya exhaled. Not just a breath, but a true letting go. The cafe operated at a slower pace now. After the whirlwind of launching Brooklyn, after the fires and near breaks and the long conversations beneath fairy lights, the table had become more than a restaurant again. It had returned to being what Evelyn always wanted, a home where strangers became family. Evelyn herself, though thinner and paler than she had been, insisted on visiting every Sunday afternoon, dressed in her softest cardigan, a velvet scarf tied at her throat. She would sit near the window, nodding to old customers and offering advice with her trademark sparkle. Stop over-salting the potatoes, darling, she told a new line cook one week. They are not being punished. Julian, who had returned full-time to Queens after gracefully exiting the television show, now taught weekend cooking classes in the back room. Children came with parents. Teenagers came with notebooks. Grandmothers came with wisdom and recipes written on yellowing index cards. And Arya started painting again, not for a gallery, not for social media, just for herself. Small canvases filled with food, light, hints passing bowls, and quiet glances across tables. Snapshots of community, memory made still. One rainy Tuesday morning, Arya found Evelyn in her room, sitting by the window with a box on her lap. A wooden box, polished, old, with a lock that clicked softly when Evelyn turned a key from her chain. I have something for you, Evelyn said without looking up. Arya sat beside her, tucking one leg beneath the other. You have given me everything, Upweller. Not this, Evelyn said. This is mine to give you now. She opened the lid. Inside, letters. Dozens of them, tied in faded blue ribbon, envelopes browned by time. What are these? Letters I never sent. From your mother to your father. From me to you. From me to your mother. Arya swallowed. Why? Because grief made me selfish. Evelyn said, her voice steady. When your parents died, I clung to what was left. I buried things too painful to face. These letters, some are love, some are rage, some are questions, but they are all the truth. Arya reached into the box and pulled one letter free. It was addressed in her mother's delicate handwriting. To Gabriel, if you ever return. Her chest tightened. I don't know if I'm ready to read these. Evelyn nodded. That's why I am giving them to you now. Before I can no longer remember who wrote them. Arya pressed the box to her chest. Thank you, she whispered. They sat there a long time, as the rain painted streaks across the window like 1,000 falling stories. That evening, Arya told Julian about the box. He was slicing pears for a rustic tart. Sleeves ruled, apron dusted with flour. He listened, silent, his brow creased. Do you want to read them together? He asked. Maybe, Arya said, but not yet. I want to hold them for a little while first, like letting memory breathe. He reached over, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. You are so brave. I'm just trying not to run. That's what bravery is, love. Later, after the bakery had closed and the chairs were stacked, Arya and Julian sat on the front steps with mugs of mulled cider. The sidewalk glistened under the street lamp, and every few minutes, a golden leaf would twirl downward like confetti from the sky. Do you ever think we needed the chaos? Arya asked. Julian chuckled. To find each other again. She nodded. Maybe we were too smooth before, too ideal, and we needed the mess to see who we really are. Julian took a sip. Maybe, or maybe love just deepens with friction, like spices toasted before grinding. She smiled. That is the most Julian thing you've ever said. I try. They leaned into each other, not saying anything for a long time. A few days later, Evelyn didn't show up for Sunday tea. Julian was the first to notice. He checked the table near the window, empty. Then the back room, the powder room, nothing. Arya dropped everything and rushed upstairs to the apartment. Evelyn was in bed, curled to one side, breathing shallow but steady. A book rested against her chestone of Arya's paintings tucked inside as a bookmark. A note sat on the nightstand. Arya unfolded it with trembling fingers. Maya, if I do not wake up today, do not weep too long. I have had 3 lives worth of love in 1 lifetime. I have watched you become the woman your mother dreamed you would be, and I have seen you create a home for so many others who never knew where they belonged. Promise me only this, that you will keep making space at the table, that you will keep telling the truth, even when it trembles, and that you will dance in your kitchen when no one is looking. That is all the heaven I could ever ask for. Evelyn, tears rolled down Arya's cheeks as she leaned over and whispered, I promise. The sun filtered gently through the lace curtains of Evelyn's old bedroom, now empty, but still warm with memory. Arya sat on the edge of the bed, a stack of papers in her lap. Evelyn's will, handwritten in looping cursive, bound in a simple blue folder. Julian stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the street below where golden leaves danced with the wind. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Finally, Arya exhaled. She left it all to the community. Julian turned. What do you mean? The apartment, the cafe, the savings didn't just leave them to me. She created a trust, a non-profit, Evelyn's Table Foundation. Her exact words were, so the table is never empty for those who hunger for food or belonging. Julian slowly sat beside her. She knew what she was doing. Even near the end, Arya nodded. Her eyes were damp but calm. She said the heart of the restaurant was never the food. It was the welcome, the second chances, the stories. They sat in silence again, listening to the faint ticking of the wall clock, as if even time was holding its breath. 3 days later, Arya met with Councilwoman Ramirez, a poised woman in her 50s with sultan pepper curls and a firm handshake. They sat in a corner booth of the cafe, steaming mugs of coffee between them. Miss Sinclair Ramirez began, I attended Evelyn's memorial. What you and your team have done here is nothing short of remarkable. Arya offered a modest smile. We just kept showing up. Evelyn set the tone. Ramirez leaned forward. Which is why we want you involved in something bigger. The city has a pilot program, Kitchen Futures. We plan to turn unused municipal spaces into teaching kitchens for at-risk youth. We want to give them not just skills, but purpose. And we want you to lead it. Arya blinked. Me? Ramirez nodded. The curriculum, the mentorship, the tone. You built that culture here. You could build it citywide. Arya stared into her coffee. Heart pounding. Can I think about it? Of course, but we hope you say yes. When the councilwoman left, Arya sat for a long time, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden tabletop Evelyn had once sanded by hand. That night, Arya brought the proposal home. She spread the documents across their kitchen table. Julian emerged from the pantry, arms full of late harvest pears. You planning a citywide food revolution without me? He teased. She looked up, half smiling. Only if you're in. He set the fruit down and joined her, scanning the overview. This is incredible. It is. He watched her carefully. But you're scared. I am, because it's not just a job. It's a shift. It would take me out of the day-to-day of the cafe. I'd be running programs, meeting officials, overseeing teams. Julian nodded slowly. And your heart? Is it ready to step into that kind of leadership? Arya looked at him, then down at Evelyn's old apron hanging on the kitchen hook. I think it's ready to expand. He smiled. Then let me handle the cafe. You build the future. She leaned against him, her forehead to his chest. I don't want us to lose what we have. Julian kissed the top of her head. Then we learn how to grow without growing apart. A week later, Arya stood in front of a room full of teens from all 5 brews. Some wore headphones, others slouched. A few looked at her like she might be another adult who would say things they already knew. She cleared her throat. You know what's funny about kitchens? They reveal everything. Who you are, what you fear. One girl, maybe 15, raised a skeptical eyebrow. Arya smiled. In a kitchen, there's no hiding. But there's also no judgment, only creation, only collaboration. She walked over to the stainless steel prep table. Today, we're going to make something simple, bread, because it's about patience, pressure, and heat, just like life. By the end of the hour, flour dust hung in the air like snowfall. Laughter echoed off the tile, and for a moment, even the most guarded kids forgot they were supposed to be tough. And Arya, flour on her cheeks, felt Evelyn's presence at her shoulder warm, proud, and eternal. The echo of laughter still clung to Arya's clothes as she locked the doors to the community kitchen late that evening. A tray of unclaimed focaccia and 3 tubs of lentil soup were bundled under her arm, meant for the shelter 3 blocks away. Her muscles ached, but it was the good kind of exhaustion aren't purposeful. Julian was already home when she arrived. The soft hum of jazz trickled from the record player, and the smell of roasted garlic filled the apartment like a warm blanket. He was in the kitchen, back turned, stirring something in a pot. Pasta night? Arya asked, sliding off her coat. With broader impatience, he said with a smile. They shared a quiet meal, not because they had nothing to say, but because the silence between them had become comfortable, sacred. Julian had always known how to speak without words. Tonight, though, Arya's mind wandered more than usual. As she dried the dishes, she finally spoke. They asked me to go on city radio next week to talk about the Kitchen Futures program. Julian looked up. That's huge. I know, but I feel like I'm becoming someone else. He leaned against the counter. Or maybe just more of who you were meant to be. Arya folded the dish towel. Do you miss when things were simpler? Julian didn't answer right away. Sometimes, but I remember how much we fought for this. To make things matter. You matter to so many people now, and that means change. She nodded, grateful, and yet, something in his tone felt like a line drawn gently in sand. The next day, Arya met Tessa, one of the teen students, in the back alley behind Evelyn's table. The girl was shaking, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "My FAFSA placement's ending," she whispered. "They don't want me anymore. I don't want to go back to the center." Arya crouched to her level. "Hey, look at me. You are not a burden. This is not your fault. You have people now." Tessa sniffed. "Will you help me?" Arya didn't hesitate. "Every way I can." That night, Arya called Councilwoman Ramirez. "We need housing partnerships," she said. "This isn't just about food. It never was." Ramirez agreed. They scheduled a task force meeting. Julian listened quietly from the kitchen doorway. "You're saving lives," he said. Arya looked over, eyes tired. "But I'm scared I'm losing pieces of ours." A week later, Arya stood in the radio station, headphones tight over her ears. The host asked about Evelyn, about legacy, about the kids. Arya answered with heart. "This program isn't about creating chefs. It's about creating dignity. It's about giving someone the tools to feed themselves and the courage to sit at the table, no matter where they came from." Back home, Julian listened to the broadcast from the living room. He had paused in the middle of prepping tomorrow's menu. Her voice came through the speakers like music, strong and clear, but something in his chest twisted. Pride and distance. He missed her, not just her presence, her questions, her laughter in the morning, the shared glances over plates and poetry. He wondered if this was the cost of greatness. Later that night, they sat on the balcony. Julian broke the silence. "Do you remember when we used to plan our days around Evelyn's mood and leftover bread?" Arya smiled. "And when your risotto ruined my first day. Best culinary insult I ever received." They laughed softly. Then he said it. "I think we need to take a break." Arya froze. "What?" "Not from each other. From the weight. From pretending we can do all of it at once." She stared at him, blinking away the sting. "You think we are pretending? I think we are tired. You are building something extraordinary, and I don't want to become the person who stands in the way of that." Tears welled. "So what are you saying? Let me take some space. Just for a while. I want to find my center again, and maybe you need that too." Arya looked out at the dark skyline. "I do not know who I am without you beside me." Julian took her hand gently. "Then let's both find out, and see if we still choose each other when the quiet returns." The cafe was noisier than usual, filled with clanging pots, teenage chatter, and the energy of too many ideas colliding at once. Yet, to Arya, it felt quieter than it used to. Julian had been gone for 2 weeks. Officially, it was a short sabbatical. He had gone to visit his mother in Vermont, check on some family land, and breathe. And officially, it was the kind of pause that left spaces in her life where words, looks, and the warmth of his hands used to live. She had buried herself in the expansion of kitchen futures. New community kitchens in Brooklyn and Harlem were now active, with more planned in Queens. Her face had been featured in the local paper. A senator had sent her a handwritten thank you. And still, the apartment at night was a little colder, the silence a little too loud. Tessa often stayed late to help her clean. The girl was thriving, placed with a warm, faster couple, enrolled in GED classes, and showing unexpected talent for pastry work. "Do you think people can change forever?" Warrior asked her one night, scrubbing sheet pans. Tessa looked up from her mixing bowl. "No," she said, "but I think we remember who we were when we feel safe. So maybe we don't change. Maybe we just forget and then remember again." Arya carried those words home like a prayer. In Vermont, Julian found the rhythm of solitude. He spent mornings helping his mother repair the fence behind their old farmhouse, afternoons wandering the orchard behind the barn. He cooked every day, but not to impress, just to feed himself, his mother, sometimes the neighbor who had just lost her husband. He wrote long letters to Arya, but never sent them. Instead, he kept them in a small notebook. Excerpts filled the pages. Day 4, I woke to birdsong. I had forgotten how much it sounds like music without needing to be anything else. Day 7, your absence feels like wind through an open window. Present, even when invisible. Day 10, I made your tomato soup recipe. I finally understand why you insist on the extra thyme. It lingers just like you. One day, he sent a single note. No email, no text, a letter, folded by hand, delivered to Evelyn's table. Dear Arya, this is not a goodbye. This is me remembering why I cooked, why I stayed, why I fell in love. You are not just someone I love. You are the someone I am better beside. If you still want me to come home, I will. All my love, Julian. 2 days after receiving the letter, Arya stood before the city council, accepting a grant to fund a statewide program. Reporters snapped photos. A journalist asked, "How do you stay grounded while your work gains so much momentum?" Arya smiled gently by remembering that it began at one small table, with one woman, one loaf of bread. That evening, she found the courage to write back to Julian, but instead of sending a letter, she booked a train to Vermont. When she arrived, Julian was at the farmer's market, selling sorta loaves he had made that morning. He looked up, and for a moment, time fell away. She walked straight into his arms. No speeches, no apology, only breath, only warmth. "Come home," she whispered. He pulled back slightly, eyes gleaming. I was waiting for the words. 6 months later, Evelyn's table reopened under a new banner. The welcome table, a sign out front read, "No matter who you are, where you came from, or how many times you've fallen, there is a place for you here." Arya ran the nonprofit. Julian ran the kitchen. They adopted Tessa as an apprentice. Rosa returned to host storytelling nights once a month. Their love was different now, quieter, more deliberate. They no longer clung to each other in the fear of losing. They stood beside each other in the joy of choosing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Julian brought out a small wooden box. This time, no fancy ring, just a promise. A simple one. Arya opened it. Inside was a string with a small copper key, the original key to Evelyn's table, to remind us where we began, and that home is something we keep building. She slipped it round her neck and kissed him. They returned inside, where the next table had just been seated. A family of 5, newly arrived from Syria. Julian passed round a bowl of warm lentils. Arya brought fresh flatbread. Rosa told a story about her first winter in New York. No grand finale, just belonging, just home.